The chief surgeon snatched the coffee cup directly from her hands and dropped it into the trash without looking at her. Not a word, not even a glance. Just the wet thud of a ceramic mug hitting metal liner and the sound of liquid splashing the sides, and 32 people standing in that corridor pretending they hadn't seen a thing. This break room, Dr. Marcus Thorne said, finally turning, is for attending physicians, not orderlies. She wasn't an orderly. Everyone knew that. Nobody said so. What none of them knew, what none of them could have imagined, was that the woman standing there in worn scrubs and scuffed sneakers had once kept 3 dying soldiers alive on a mountainside in Afghanistan while taking fire from 2 directions. Her name was Sergeant Major Claire Voss, but here she was just a nurse. Before this story goes any further, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because the stories on this channel do not end the way you expect. Like this video if you want to see people like Claire get exactly what they deserve, and drop a comment telling me your city and country. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the moment everything changed. The thing about Harlow Valley Medical Center was that it looked better than it was. The exterior had been renovated 3 years ago. Pale limestone facade, tall glass entry panels, a new helipad on the roof with a freshly painted red cross that you could see from the highway. The lobby had soft lighting and a piano that nobody ever played, and potted ferns that the facilities team replaced every 6 weeks whether they needed it or not. The promotional brochures called it the Pacific Northwest's Premier Regional Trauma Center, which was the kind of phrase that meant something until you actually worked there. Claire Voss had been working there for 14 months. She had come to Harlow Valley the way most people come to places like it, quietly, without announcement, carrying a resume that told a partial story. The partial story was this: a decade of nursing experience, certifications in emergency trauma and critical care, additional training in surgical assist and flight medicine. What the resume did not include was the rest. The 2 combat deployments, the special operations attachment that didn't officially exist, the Valor Commendation, the field promotions, the unit citation, the years of work that could not be disclosed on a standard employment document for reasons that had nothing to do with shame and everything to do with classification levels. She had not told anyone. That was a choice she'd made deliberately, and she'd stick by it. Her shift started at 0600, same as always. She changed in the locker room, pulled her dark hair back, clipped her badge to her chest pocket. The badge said Claire Voss, RN. It said nothing else. She liked it that way. The ER at Harlow Valley ran the way most regional ERs ran. Organized chaos with a paper-thin veneer of procedure stretched over the top. There were good nurses here. There were some good doctors. There was also a hierarchy so rigid and so casually cruel that most of the nursing staff had stopped reporting incidents the way you stop reporting potholes in a city that never fixes them. Dr. Marcus Thorne was the chief of surgery and had been for 11 years. He was not, by most measures, a bad surgeon. His complication rates were within acceptable range. His OR time was efficient. He had a wall full of plaques in his office and a hospital board that had learned over the years that certain behaviors were easier to overlook than to address. Claire had encountered him 7 times in 14 months. Each time had been a variation on a theme. He spoke to her the way someone speaks to furniture: necessary, inconvenient, not worth direct eye contact. She had documented 2 of those encounters in the incident system. Both reports had been reviewed and closed within 48 hours with no action taken. She had stopped filing after the second one. This morning she'd come in early to check on a patient, a 63-year-old man named Gerald, who'd come in overnight with chest pain that turned out to be esophageal spasm, not cardiac, and who had been terrified and alone and had asked the night before if someone would check on him before rounds. She'd said yes because she'd meant it, not because it was in her assigned patient list. She was walking out of Gerald's room with an empty coffee cup she'd been carrying since 0540, when Thorne came around the corner with 2 residents and the charge nurse, Pam, who was already 3 steps behind and already apologizing for something that hadn't happened yet. Thorne didn't acknowledge Claire. He didn't register her as a person in the hallway. He registered her as an obstacle, specifically someone standing near the doorway of a room he was about to enter. And when he reached for the chart on the door hook, his elbow caught the door frame and he turned, irritated, and saw her. She had been stepping aside. She was already moving. It didn't matter. His eyes went to the coffee cup in her hand, and something in his expression shifted. Not to anger exactly, but to something worse. The particular irritation of a man who has decided, before any words are spoken, that he is being inconvenienced by someone who has no right to inconvenience him. "That's a patient corridor," he said. "Not a cafe." "I'm aware," Claire said. "I was just checking on, you're blocking a care corridor with a personal beverage." He said it the way people say things when they're not actually interested in the response. She started to explain. He didn't wait for it. He reached over, took the mug from her hand, and dropped it into the biohazard-adjacent waste bin at the corridor station. The sound it made was flat and final. 30 feet of hallway, 4 nurses, 2 residents, Pam standing behind him with her clipboard pressed to her chest and her eyes on the floor. Nobody said a word. Claire stood there for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to feel the full weight of the silence, long enough to recognize, not for the first time, the specific texture of a room full of people deciding not to see what they'd just seen. "Have a good shift, doctor," she said. Her voice was even. She turned and walked toward the nursing station. She heard one of the residents say something low and amused. She didn't turn around. At the nursing station, Dara, one of the night-to-day transition nurses, handed Claire a tablet without looking up. "Triage just flagged a walk-in, abdominal, possible appendicitis, Bay 7. "On it," Claire said. She clipped the tablet to her wrist mount and walked toward Bay 7 and did not think about the coffee or the hallway or the sound the mug had made when it hit the trash. She had learned a long time ago in places far more dangerous than this how to file things away, not suppress them, file them. Put them somewhere with a label and a location so they didn't spill into the next thing that needed her full attention. The walk-in Bay 7 was a 22-year-old woman named Priya who was sweating through her shirt and trying not to cry and had driven herself to the hospital at 5:45 in the morning because she hadn't wanted to wake her roommate. "On a scale of 1 to 10, Claire said, pulling the curtain. 8, Priya said. Then, 9. Maybe 9. "Where exactly?" "Lower right. Started last night. I thought it was cramps, but it's not cramps." Claire's hands were already moving. She noted the guarding, the rebound tenderness, the specific pattern of pain that tracked along McBurney's point with a consistency that was, in her experience, not subtle. She flagged for a stat CBC and CMP, called the attending on call, Dr. Reyes, who was competent and arrived within 4 minutes, and stayed with Priya while the numbers came back. The results confirmed it. They had her prepped and en route to surgical consult by 7:20. "You're going to be okay," Claire told her, before they wheeled her out. "The surgeon on call is good. You did the right thing coming in." Priya grabbed her wrist. "Will you be there?" "No, but you don't need me. You've got this." Priya let go. Claire watched the gurney turn the corner. This was the part nobody saw. The part that didn't go into any file or produce any documentation. The part that was just a person, afraid, and another person deciding that the fear was worth acknowledging. By 9:30, she had seen 4 more patients, assisted with a suture repair on a kid who'd put his hand through a window, caught a dosage error on a pharmacy order that the pharmacist confirmed immediately and thanked her for, and drunk approximately half of a terrible replacement coffee that Dara had shoved at her from the break room station. The morning was loud and fast and short on staff, the way most mornings were. At 10:15, Pam found her at the supply cabinet. Pam was the charge nurse. She was also, in the particular taxonomy of Harlow Valley, a person in a position that required her to simultaneously manage nursing staff and manage the consequences of what attending physicians did to nursing staff, which were sometimes the same thing and often were not. She had been in the role for 6 years. She was not cruel. She was tired in a very specific way that Claire recognized. "Claire," Pam didn't quite meet her eyes. "Dr. Thorne filed a conduct report this morning." Claire turned. "On what grounds?" "Hostile behavior, improper use of a care corridor, blocking access to a patient room." The words were so far from what had happened that Claire almost laughed. She didn't. "I was stepping aside," she said. "I know." Pam's voice was flat and careful. "The report is already in the system. You'll need to speak with HR, probably this afternoon." Claire looked at her for a long moment. "Is there going to be an investigation?" "Into his conduct?" Pam said it without expression. "No." Claire nodded slowly. She turned back to the supply cabinet. "Claire," Pam hesitated. "I'm sorry, I know that doesn't help." "It's fine, Pam. It's not fine." "No," Claire agreed, "but it's familiar." She pulled the supplies she needed and walked back onto the floor. The HR meeting happened at 2 p.m. in a small room with a frosted glass window that looked out into the administrative corridor. The HR coordinator was a man named Bill, who had the specific energy of someone who'd been doing this long enough to know which outcomes were predetermined and had learned to keep his paperwork clean. He read her the report. She responded to each point factually. She noted that she had been stepping aside when the incident occurred, that there had been multiple witnesses, and that she would like to file a counter-incident report documenting Dr. Thorne's behavior. Bill typed notes for a while. "We'll review this and be in touch," he said finally. "What's the timeline?" "Generally, for conduct reviews at this level, 3 to 5 business days." She knew what that meant. She'd learned to know what that kind of language meant, not because she was cynical, but because she paid attention. She signed the paperwork she needed to sign and went back to her shift. At 4 o'clock, Dara waved her over. "Helicopter inbound, ETA 12 minutes, multiple casualties. They're saying military, trauma level, classified transport." Claire went still. "How many?" "They think 3, maybe 4. The codes they're running, I've never seen that designation before." Claire had. She recognized the transport designation from a different life. It was a specific format used for special operations medical evacuations. The kind of thing that didn't get announced over a general dispatch channel. "Tell triage to prep the trauma bays," she said, "all 3. And get O-negative on standby because we don't know who's walking through that door without a blood type on file." Dara looked at her. "Should I check with Dr. Thorne? Tell him after you set up the bays," Claire said. "The helicopter doesn't care about the org chart." She was already moving toward the trauma wing when her radio crackled. The voice on the other end said, "Flight crew reports 1 critical, 2 serious, lead casualty, confirmed arterial bleed, right femoral, BP dropping en route, estimated blood loss at departure, 2 liters." Claire stopped walking. Femoral artery. 2 liters of blood already gone. 12 minutes ago. She did the math the way she had learned to do it, not as an abstract equation, but as a reality with a person at the center of it. The kind of math where wrong answers had a specific, irreversible consequence. She picked up her pace. By the time the helicopter landed, she was already at the rooftop trauma bay with Dara and 2 ER techs and everything she'd called for. The doors opened and the flight medic, young, pale, running on adrenaline, briefed her in 9 seconds flat. "Master Sergeant Jonas Webb, 36, Alpha Group, 2-tour deployment. Shrapnel wound, right femoral canal. Tourniquet applied 31 minutes ago at point of injury. BP on arrival to you, 94 over 60 and falling. He's been in and out." The gurney came off the helicopter. Claire looked at Jonas Webb for 1 second. Just one. She had seen this before. Not this man, not this wound, but this moment. The moment where a person is still technically present, but the window is closing and everyone around them is in the fraction of a second between seeing the situation clearly and understanding what it means. "I need a second tourniquet placed proximal to the first," she said. Her voice was calm and completely flat. "And I need 2 large-bore IVs, 16-gauge minimum, now. Dara, call the blood bank. We're activating the massive transfusion protocol. Tell them I want the first 2 units here in 3 minutes." "You're not the attending," one of the ER techs said. He wasn't being obstinate. He was genuinely confused. "No," she said. "I'm the person who's been in this situation before. Get me the second tourniquet." He got it. The next 4 minutes were the kind that exist outside of normal time. Her hands moved the way hands move when a skill is not just practiced but absorbed. when the body knows what to do before the brain has finished announcing the plan. She identified the wound track, assessed the tourniquet placement, called for adjustments to the second placement to get proper occlusion, ordered the blood products by specific ratio, and talked to Jonas Webb the entire time in a low, steady voice that was designed not for comfort but for anchoring, keeping him present, keeping his nervous system aware that the people around him knew what they were doing. Jonas, stay with me. You're at the hospital. Your femoral is the problem, and we're fixing it. What's your blood type? A pause. His eyes found hers. A positive, he said. His voice was barely there. Good. You've got good veins. That's going to help us. She was already calling it to Dara. Get me A positive if we have it, O negative if we don't. But we're pushing fluids now regardless. The resident on call, a third-year named Dr. Elliot Park, arrived 40 seconds later, slightly out of breath. She handed him a precise verbal summary in under 30 seconds. Current BP, estimated blood loss, tourniquet status, IV access established, blood products en route. We need to get him to the OR, she said. He needs vascular surgery. The femoral canal. I can see the depth of the wound track. This isn't going to close with a repair kit. Elliot looked at her, then at the patient, then back at her. Agreed, he said. And then, to his credit, good call on the MTP. They were moving Jonas toward the OR elevator when Dr. Thorne arrived. He came through the trauma wing doors in his surgical whites, two nurses trailing behind him, already speaking before he had cleared the entry threshold. Who authorized a massive transfusion protocol? Nobody answered immediately. He saw Claire. His expression didn't change exactly, but something behind it sharpened. You, he said. The patient has a catastrophic femoral arterial injury, she said. He needed... You are a floor nurse, Thorne said. You don't activate protocols. You don't direct trauma care. You don't... He stopped, visibly recalibrating. Where is the attending? Elliot Park is with the patient. He confirmed the protocol. We need to get him into... Step back, Thorne said. He said it the way he had said everything else that day. Not to her as a person, but to a problem that needed to be moved out of his way. She didn't step back. The patient has approximately 40 minutes before we're looking at irreversible ischemic damage to the lower extremity, she said. We can have this conversation after. The words landed in the corridor like something physical. Thorne stared at her. Behind him, both nurses were absolutely still. Dr. Park, Thorne said, without breaking eye contact with Claire, take over from here. I am over it, Elliot said from beside the gurney. She's right about the timeline. We need to move. Thorne looked at Elliot. Something passed between them. Not a confrontation exactly, but the precursor to one. Move the patient, Thorne said finally. The gurney rolled. Claire followed. Thorne's hand came down on her shoulder. Not a grip exactly. More of a stop. You, he said, are done for the day. She turned to face him. The patient is in the care of Dr. Park and the surgical team. You are no longer needed. He removed his hand. I'll have security escort you out if you prefer. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about the mountainside. She thought about what it costs to hold a position when everything around you is noise and chaos, and people making decisions out of ego instead of information. She had held positions in worse conditions than this, but the patient was moving. The patient was going where he needed to go. Elliot was competent. The blood was ordered. The protocol was running. She took a slow breath. The patient is stable for transport, she said. Not to Thorne. To nobody in particular. That's what matters. She turned and walked back toward the elevator. Behind her, she heard Thorne say something to someone about a security escort and a badge suspension. She filed it away. Labeled it. Set it in its location. She did not look back. At the nursing station on the ground floor, Dara found her 3 minutes later. Her face was tight. He's filing another report, Dara said quietly. Bill and HR already called down. They want your badge by end of shift. Okay. Claire. The soldier, Claire said. Jonas Webb. Can you make sure someone is monitoring his post-op status? Not for me. Just make sure he doesn't end up lost in the system. Dara stared at her. That's what you're worried about right now? That's what I'm asking about right now, Claire said. Can you do it? Dara nodded slowly. Yeah, I can do it. Claire pulled her badge lanyard over her head. She set it on the desk. She got her jacket from the locker room, her keys, her bag, and she walked out of Harlow Valley Medical Center at 4:47 p.m. through the side entrance that the nurses used when they didn't want to walk past the front desk. Outside, the air was cool. September in this part of Oregon had a particular quality, the light coming in low and amber through the Douglas firs at the edge of the parking lot, the temperature dropping fast once the afternoon passed its peak. She stood next to her car for a moment and let the air do what it did. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She looked at it for a long moment. She answered. The voice on the other end was male, calm, with the specific cadence of someone who was used to delivering information that required a measured response. Is this Claire Voss? It is. Ms. Voss, this is operations out of Joint Base Lewis McChord. We have a situation developing at your location, and we need to understand something before it gets complicated. A pause. Are you still inside Harlow Valley Medical Center? She looked at the building behind her. I'm in the parking lot, she said. Another pause. Longer. Ma'am, the voice said, and something in his tone had shifted, formalized, precise. We have a patient in your facility who, upon regaining consciousness 40 minutes ago, said one thing before anything else. She waited. He asked for you, the voice said. By rank. The parking lot was very quiet. Which rank? She asked, even though she already knew. He said, Get me Commander Voss. The amber light was fading now behind the tree line. Somewhere above her, on the roof, the helicopter that had brought Jonas Webb was still sitting on the pad, rotors folded, waiting. She looked at her phone. She said nothing. The voice continued. There are some people who are going to want to speak with you, ma'am, tonight. I'd recommend staying close. She stayed in the parking lot for another 40 seconds after the call had ended, which was not something she typically allowed herself. The voice from Lewis McChord had given her a name, Captain Diane Okafor, Patient Liaison, Special Operations Command, and a number to call back, and the information that someone would be at the hospital by 700 the following morning. Not a question, not a request. A statement of what was going to happen, delivered in the tone of someone reading off a schedule. She had said, Understood. She had ended the call. Now she stood in the cooling air and looked at the side door of Harlow Valley Medical Center and felt the particular weight of a situation that had just changed shape on her. 14 months of keeping her head down and doing her work and filing things away had just run directly into a wall she hadn't seen coming, and the wall had a name on it, and the name was Jonas Webb. She got in her car. She did not drive home. She sat in the driver's seat with the engine off and her phone face up on the passenger seat and thought through what she knew. Jonas was out of surgery. That part she'd gotten from the Lewis McChord contact before the call ended. The vascular team had repaired the femoral. He was in the ICU, sedated but stable. He had woken up for approximately 3 minutes before sedation was reinstated, and in those 3 minutes he had asked one question. She knew Jonas Webb. Not well. Not the way you know someone from your own unit or your own deployment, but she had been attached to his team for 11 weeks in a place that no longer appeared on her resume, and she had pulled him out of a vehicle that had taken an IED strike on a mountain road, and she had kept pressure on a chest wound for 22 minutes while a medevac fought through rotary wing restrictions to reach their position. He had been conscious for most of it, which was not ideal for either of them, but it meant he knew exactly whose hands were on him. He would remember. Of course he remembered. The problem was that now other people were going to start asking questions, and questions had a way of pulling threads, and threads had a way of unraveling things she had spent considerable effort keeping orderly. She picked up her phone and called her sister, Renata, who lived 40 minutes north and who was one of 3 people in the world who knew anything about her military background beyond the official record. Renata answered on the second ring. Hey, you sound weird. I don't sound weird. You sound like you're in your car thinking too hard. I'm in my car. What happened? It wasn't a question. Claire told her the short version. The call from Lewis McChord. Jonas Webb, the suspension, the badge sitting on Dara's desk. Renata was quiet for a moment. Then, "So they're coming tomorrow. 7 a.m. And Thorne doesn't know who you actually are. Nobody here does." Another pause. "Claire, do you want my opinion?" "You're going to give it anyway." "Go home," Renata said. "Get some sleep, because tomorrow is going to be a very different kind of day, and you're going to want to have slept." It was not complicated advice. Claire stared at the windshield for a moment. "I don't know how this plays out," she said. "I know you don't," Renata said. "Neither do I, but I know you handled worse on a lot less sleep in worse places, so." Claire exhaled. "I'll call you tomorrow." "You better." She drove home. She slept badly for about 5 hours. She was back at the hospital at 0640. Not to work. She didn't have a badge. She sat in the parking lot in her car, same spot as last night, and drank a gas station coffee that was just barely on the correct side of drinkable, and she watched the building. At 6:52, a vehicle pulled into the lot. Dark blue, government plates, the specific kind of unremarkable that is its own kind of conspicuous. A woman got out. Late 30s, trim, in civilian clothes that fit the way civilian clothes fit when they're worn by someone more comfortable in a uniform. She walked toward the main entrance with the bearing of someone who had been to a lot of places and didn't need to announce herself when she arrived. Captain Diane Okafor, presumably. Claire got out of her car. Okafor saw her before she'd covered half the distance between them. Stopped. Assessed. Something in her expression settled. "Ms. Voss," she said. "Captain." Okafor looked at her for a moment. The civilian clothes, the gas station coffee, the general presentation of a woman who had been suspended from a job and had come back to the parking lot anyway. "You're not inside," Okafor said. "They took my badge yesterday." "I know what they did yesterday." Okafor glanced at the building. "We're going inside. You're coming with me." "They may not let me—" "Miss Voss," Okafor said. "I have paperwork that gives me access to a classified patient in this facility and the authority to bring whatever support personnel I deem necessary. You are support personnel. You're coming." Claire looked at her. "Okay," she said. The lobby of Harlow Valley at 700 had a different texture than it did at 600 during a shift change. Quieter, the administrative staff just arriving, the overnight security guard still at the desk before the day shift took over. The security guard was named Paul. Claire knew him. He saw her come through the door and started to say something, and then Okafor set a document on his desk and Paul read it and said, "4th floor, ICU North, room 412. They took the elevator. Jonas Webb looked smaller than she remembered. That was the first thing. The ICU had a particular effect on people, stripped of context, reduced to what the body actually was without the gear and the posture and the circumstance that usually surrounded them. He was hooked to monitors and IV lines and a pressure cuff that cycled every 15 minutes, and his right leg was elevated and immobilized and the blanket was pulled to his waist. He was awake. His eyes were open and tracking when they came through the door, which meant the sedation had been reduced since last night. He looked at Okafor, then at Claire. Something in his face changed. Not relief exactly. Something quieter and more complicated than relief. "There she is," he said. His voice was wrecked from the intubation, low and rough at the edges. "Hey, Jonas," Claire said. "I heard you got fired." "Suspended." "Over me?" "Over a coffee cup, technically." She pulled the chair from the corner and sat down near the bed. "How's the leg?" "Attached." He shifted slightly, winced, which is better than the alternative, so. He looked at her with the particular directness of someone who had decided to get to a point. "They told me you were the one in the ER. I was there, yes. They also told me some surgeon threw you out. He asked me to step back. I stepped back." Jonas made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "That sounds like a very polite version of what happened." "It was a polite version of what I'm telling you, yes." Okafor, who had been standing near the window, spoke. "Sergeant Webb, the reason I'm here this morning is that Command has some concerns about the circumstances of your care and the circumstances of the staff change during your stabilization." "I know why you're here," Jonas said. He looked at Claire. "And I know what I'm going to tell them." She held his gaze. "Jonas, you don't have to—" I'm going to tell them exactly what happened, he said, which is that I came in with a bleeding femoral and you fixed it before anyone with an MD had finished putting on gloves, and then someone who apparently doesn't know the difference between authority and competence had you removed. He paused. Did I get that wrong? You got it directionally correct, Claire said. Great. He looked at Okafor. Who do I tell that to? Okafor looked at Claire, a long look that had a lot of conversation in it without any actual words. There's going to be a meeting, Okafor said finally. Hospital administration? Today, if possible. She glanced at her phone. My supervisor is on his way from Lewis McCord. He should be here by 11. Claire said nothing. She stayed with Jonas for another 20 minutes. They talked about practical things, his recovery timeline, the physical therapy schedule, what the surgical team had said about the repair. He asked about the rest of his team. She didn't have that information and said so. He nodded, accepting that the way soldiers accept the things they can't change right now because there's a longer list of things they can change later. When she stood to leave, he grabbed her wrist. His grip was weaker than she would have expected a few years ago. The blood loss and the surgery had taken something from him that would come back eventually, but wasn't back yet. Claire, he said. She looked at him. I'm not going to let them do this, he said. Jonas, I know. He let go. But I'm not. She walked out into the corridor. The morning moved in a way that mornings at hospitals move when something is building, a specific quality of tension that was visible in the body language of the staff she passed in the hallway. Dara intercepted her near the ICU waiting area with wide eyes and a coffee she actually wanted. You're back, Dara said. I'm here with the military liaison. HR has been calling everyone from your shift yesterday, and Thorne came in early, like 6:15 early. He's in his office, has been since he got here. Claire accepted the coffee. What have people been saying to HR? Dara pressed her lips together. Elliot Park told them the MTP call was correct, and he confirmed it. That's the only one I know for sure. What about the others in the corridor, when Thorne took the coffee? Dara looked away, which was an answer. It's okay, Claire said. I know. It's not, Dara. It's okay. People protect themselves. I understand that. She said it without bitterness because she genuinely meant it. Not everyone was positioned to absorb the consequences of speaking up. She had spent years in environments where that calculus was made under conditions far more extreme than this, and she had watched people make the right call and the wrong call and everything in between, and she had stopped judging the math a long time ago. What she had never stopped doing was keeping her own record of events. By 9 o'clock, the corridor outside the ICU nursing station had 2 military personnel in it who were not Okafor, a sergeant in dress uniform who stood near the elevator bank, and a man in a suit who had the specific look of a lawyer or a liaison officer, or possibly both. They spoke to no one and watched everything. At 9:37, her phone rang. HR Bill. Ms. Voss, Bill said. He sounded like someone who had been briefed and was working to keep the briefing out of his voice. There is a meeting being scheduled for today, 11 o'clock, in the executive conference room. Administration would like you to attend. In what capacity? A pause. As a participant. Not as a defendant? Another pause. Longer. As a participant, he repeated. She said she would be there. At 10:45, she was in the 4th floor corridor outside the executive conference room when Thorne walked past. He saw her. His pace did not change, but something shifted in his expression. A flicker of recalibration. The face of a man who had expected a situation to be further along in a particular direction and was adjusting to the fact that it wasn't. He did not speak to her. She did not speak to him. The conference room held 11 people. Hospital CEO Margaret Finch, who Claire recognized from the staff photo wall in the main lobby but had never actually spoken to. The chief medical officer. The head of HR, not Bill, but Bill's director, a woman named Sandra. 2 legal representatives from the hospital's outside counsel. Okafor. The suited man from the hallway, who turned out to be Colonel Patrick Reese, Medical Command, JSOC Liaison. The sergeant from the elevator bank. Thorne. And Claire. Thorne had brought no one with him. That was a choice that said something, though Claire wasn't sure exactly what. Margaret Finch opened. We're here to address several matters related to events over the past 24 hours involving our facility and personnel. She spoke in the careful language of an administrator who was aware that everything said in this room was being, at minimum, noted and possibly recorded. Colonel Reese, I understand you have information relevant to Ms. Voss's role in yesterday's trauma response. Reese didn't adjust his posture. He was the kind of man who sat the same way regardless of what he was about to say. Ms. Voss, he said, and he turned slightly so that his address was aimed slightly past Finch, toward the room generally, is a former sergeant major in the United States Army. She served 2 combat deployments, the second as a senior medical specialist attached to a special operations task force at a classification level I am not at liberty to detail in this room. Her military qualifications in emergency trauma exceed the civilian equivalent of an emergency medicine attending physician in the following categories. He set a folder on the table. He didn't open it. Hemorrhagic shock management, massive transfusion protocol, penetrating trauma, surgical assist under austere conditions, and field vascular repair. The room was quiet. Thorne's expression did not change, but his stillness changed. There was a difference between a man who was still because he was composed and a man who was still because he had just received information that required a full recalculation of his position, and Claire could see, watching him, which one this was. Her identification of the wound pattern, her activation of the MTP, and her rapid vascular stabilization in that trauma bay yesterday afternoon, Reese continued, were consistent with the highest level of field medicine practice and were, in the assessment of the military medical team that has reviewed the record, directly responsible for the preservation of Sergeant Webb's lower extremity and likely his life. Finch cleared her throat. I see. What I want to be clear about, Reese said, is that the actions taken to remove Miss Voss from that trauma bay and the conduct report filed against her and the badge suspension occurred in the middle of a life-saving intervention involving a military personnel in classified transport status. He looked at Finch. We have questions about the sequence of events. Specifically, we have questions about who gave the order, on what basis, and whether that order constituted an interference with the care of a federal military asset. The words federal military asset landed in the room in a very specific way. Sandra from HR shifted slightly in her seat. The legal team did not visibly react, which meant they had been prepared for this and were now being very careful. Thorne spoke. The nurse, Ms. Voss, Reese said. A beat. Ms. Voss, Thorne said, with the effort of someone making a visible concession, was acting outside the scope of her nursing role. Protocol requires that trauma direction, protocol, Reese said, does not account for a credentialed combat trauma specialist with qualifications that exceed the attending on duty at the time. Her qualifications were not disclosed to this facility. They didn't need to be disclosed for them to be real, Reese said. There was a silence in the room. Claire had not said anything yet. She was aware of this. She was also aware that this was, for the moment, correct, that this was not yet her conversation to lead. She had learned, over years of working in rooms that were designed to exclude her from the outcome, how to wait, how to identify the moment when waiting was no longer the right strategy. Finch spoke carefully. Ms. Voss, is there anything you would like to add? There it was. Claire set her hands flat on the table, not a gesture of aggression, just the particular stillness of a person choosing their words. Sergeant Webb arrived with a catastrophic femoral arterial bleed, she said. He had lost approximately 2 liters of blood before reaching us. He had 30 to 40 minutes before the window for limb preservation closed. I have managed this category of injury before under conditions that were considerably more difficult than a trauma bay with full equipment. She paused. I did not identify myself as anything other than the nurse present. I did not claim authority I was not given. I did what needed to be done until someone with authority confirmed the course of treatment. Dr. Park confirmed it within approximately 90 seconds of arrival. She looked at Thorne. I don't know what Dr. Thorne believed he was responding to when he entered that bay, she said. I can tell you what the patient needed. And I can tell you what happened when I was removed. What happened? Finch asked. The patient survived, Claire said. That's what happened. Everything else is paperwork. Thorne's jaw moved slightly. The hospital's legal team exchanged a look that lasted about half a second and contained a great deal of information. Reese opened the folder on the table. He pushed it toward Finch. We're requesting a formal review of the conduct report filed against Ms. Voss, a review of the suspension, and access to all incident reports filed by or against staff involved in yesterday's events. He paused. Voluntarily would be faster. The alternative involves a federal records request, which is available to us given the classification of the patient and the circumstances of care. Finch looked at the folder. She looked at her legal team. They gave her the very small, very specific nod that lawyers give when the answer has already been determined and the question is just how long it takes to arrive. Of course, Finch said. We'll cooperate fully. The meeting ended at 12:40. Thorne left without speaking. Claire watched him go. The precise way he walked, the particular set of his shoulders that was, she had learned over 14 months, the posture of a man who had never once been made to answer for anything in this building, and was currently processing what it felt like to be close to it. Okafor fell in beside Claire in the corridor. How are you doing? She asked. I'm okay. You've been doing this kind of thing longer than I have, so I'm going to trust that answer. Okafor glanced sideways. Reese is going to push for the full review. He wants the incident reports going back. He said 12 months, but I think he means further. Further is fine, Claire said. There could be other things in those files. There are other things in those files, Claire said. I know, because I filed some of them. Okafor stopped walking. You filed incident reports. 2. Both closed without action within 48 hours. Okafor looked at her for a long moment. You kept copies. I keep copies of everything. Claire said it without satisfaction, just fact. I learned that early. They walked to the elevator. Okafor pressed the button. There's something else, Okafor said. Her voice had dropped slightly, not secretive, but careful. The tone of someone managing a sequence. Reese is going to request Ms. Voss's reinstatement pending review. Okay. Thorne is going to push back. He will. And there are 2 other nurses who filed incidents against him in the last 18 months, Okafor said. Both closed, both still employed, both of whom, according to what I've been told this morning, have been waiting. Claire looked at her. Waiting for what? She said, though she thought she knew. For something to stick, Okafor said. The elevator arrived. They stepped in. On the 3rd floor, the doors opened and Dara was standing there, apparently headed up, who stopped when she saw Claire and held the door. They're calling a staff meeting, Dara said. Thorne just sent a facility-wide memo. He's asking everyone who was in that corridor yesterday to submit written statements. Her voice was tight. Claire, he's naming you specifically. He's saying you created a hostile environment in a care corridor. He can say that, Claire said. He's trying to get ahead of it, Okafor said quietly, to nobody in particular. He knows the review is coming. Dara looked between them. What review? There's going to be a formal investigation, Claire said. Military involvement. The patient's care, the incident reports, the conduct history. She held Dara's gaze. If there are staff who have things they didn't feel they could report, now is probably the time. Dara's face did a complicated thing. Several things, in sequence, crossing it like weather. There are people who've been waiting to say something for a long time, Dara said finally. I'm just telling you that. I know. Pam too, probably. She won't say it first, but if someone else starts... The elevator began to signal that the door had been held too long. Dara stepped back. The doors began to close. Claire, she said, just before they did. Claire held them with one hand. He knows you have copies, Dara said quickly, of the incident reports. Someone told him. I don't know who, but he knows, and he sent a message to legal about a half hour ago about document preservation. She paused. He's not worried about the military stuff. He thinks that'll get handled at a federal level and won't touch him directly. What he's worried about is you. The doors closed. Claire stood in the elevator with Okafor and let that sit for a moment. "He's not wrong to be worried," Okafor said. "No," Claire agreed. "Do the copies exist in multiple locations?" "Yes." "Good." The elevator reached the ground floor. They stepped out into the lobby. Through the glass panels at the front of the building, Claire could see a news van pulling into the access road. One of the local stations, the antenna on the roof still folded down, somebody in a headset on the phone in the passenger seat. Okafor saw it too. "Someone talked," she said. "Someone always talks." Okafor pulled out her phone and dialed. While it rang, she looked at Claire. "This is about to get louder." "I know." "You ready for that?" Claire watched the van park. A reporter got out. Young woman, mid-20s, pulling a jacket on over her blouse, gesturing to the camera operator behind her. The camera operator was already shouldering the rig. 14 months she had kept her head down in this building. 14 months of coffee cups and incident reports and closed files and corridors where 30 people decided not to see what they'd seen. She had filed things away, labeled them, kept them in order. She had waited for nothing because she had expected nothing. But Jonas Webb had woken up in an ICU bed and said her name. And now there was a news van in the parking lot and a colonel in the conference room upstairs, and somewhere in this building, Marcus Thorne was drafting a statement to a legal team that was, for the first time in 11 years, not entirely sure what it was defending. "Yeah," she said. "I'm ready." Okafor's call connected. She turned away to speak. Claire's own phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. Different from last night's Lewis McCord number, different area code. She looked at it. She answered. "Ms. Voss." A woman's voice. Measured, formal. "My name is Special Agent Dana Farrow, Defense Criminal Investigative Service. I need to speak with you regarding several matters related to Harlow Valley Medical Center." A pause. "At your convenience, I'd prefer to do this today. Specifically before Dr. Thorne has the opportunity to speak with his personal attorney, which my information suggests he's scheduled for 3 o'clock this afternoon." Claire looked at the reporter outside, who was now adjusting her lapel mic and looking at the hospital entrance with the expression of someone who has been told there is a story here, but not yet what it is. "I'm available now," Claire said. Special Agent Dana Farrow was already inside the building. That was the first thing Claire noticed when she turned from the lobby window. The woman was standing near the information desk with a badge case open in one hand and a document folder under her arm, speaking quietly to the security guard on day shift. Not Paul anymore. Kevin, who was 26 and took his job seriously and was currently looking at Farrow's credentials with the focused attention of someone trying to decide if this situation required a supervisor. It did not require a supervisor. Farrow's credentials were apparently sufficient to settle the question on their own, because Kevin nodded twice and picked up his desk phone. Claire crossed the lobby. Farrow saw her coming and closed the badge case. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, compact, with close-cropped natural hair going silver at the temples, and the particular economy of movement that came from years of doing a job that required you to read rooms fast. She wore a dark blazer over a gray blouse and no jewelry except a watch, and she looked at Claire the way investigators look at people they've already read a file on. Not unfriendly, but assembling something. "Ms. Voss," Farrow said, "thank you for being available. You said before 3 o'clock. It's not yet 1. "I appreciate that." Farrow glanced toward the corridor. "Is there somewhere we can speak privately?" Kevin directed them to a family consultation room off the main corridor. The kind of room that existed to deliver bad news in, small and overfurnished with a couch that was slightly too soft, and a box of tissues on every surface. Farrow set her folder on the coffee table and did not sit on the too soft couch. She took the chair across from it. Claire took the other chair. "I'll tell you why I'm here," Farrow said, without preamble. DCIS opened a preliminary inquiry into Dr. Marcus Thorne 14 days ago, separate from anything that happened yesterday. The inquiry was triggered by a procurement irregularity in the Surgical Services Department, specifically a billing pattern involving military-contracted insurance claims that didn't match procedure documentation. Claire looked at her. Fraud. Potentially, it's a preliminary inquiry, but in the course of that inquiry, we pulled a broader picture of Dr. Thorne's record at this facility, and what we found was a pattern of conduct complaints. nursing staff primarily, that were filed and closed without investigation over a period of approximately 9 years. Farrow opened the folder. She did not hand anything across. Your name appears in 2 of those reports. I filed them. Yes, and they were closed. Farrow looked up. I want to ask you about the events of yesterday, but I also want to ask you about the events of the past 14 months. Specifically, I want to understand what you observed. It was a particular kind of question, the kind that sounds open but has a shape to it, designed to let a person talk in the direction they were going to talk anyway, without the interviewer having to telegraph what they already knew. Claire had used versions of this herself, in different contexts, in different rooms. She told Farrow what she knew. She was specific and chronological, and she did not editorialize. She described the 2 incidents she had filed. She described what had happened in the corridor with the coffee, what she had observed of Thorne's interactions with other staff over 14 months, what she had heard secondhand and clearly identified as secondhand. She described the trauma bay, the sequence of events, Elliot Park's arrival and confirmation, and Thorne's order to step back. She spoke for 23 minutes. Farrow took notes with a pen on a legal pad and asked 4 clarifying questions, all of them precise and all of them pointing at the same thing: sequence, authorization, documentation, witnesses. The copies of the incident reports you filed, Farrow said, are they accessible? I can have them to you within an hour. That would be helpful. Farrow made a note. Ms. Voss, and this is not a formal question, just for my own understanding, why did you stay after the first report was closed? Claire was quiet for a moment. The work was good, she said, and leaving looked like losing. Farrow wrote something down. Claire couldn't read it from across the table. One more thing, Farrow said. Are you aware of any other staff members who may have documented or witnessed conduct by Dr. Thorne that they did not formally report? I'm aware that the possibility exists, Claire said. I don't have names to give you, but if you're asking whether I think there are people in this building who have been waiting for a reason to speak, yes, I think that. Farrow closed the folder. Thank you. They left the consultation room at 1:34. In the hallway, Okafor was waiting with the suited look of someone who had been making calls since the meeting ended. She looked at Farrow with the specific recognition of 2 federal employees in the same corridor who have not been briefed on each other. DCIS, Okafor said. Not a question. Medcom liaison, Farrow said. Colonel Reese's office, yes. A pause. Both women recalibrating. We should probably talk, Farrow said. Probably, Okafor agreed. Claire left them to it. She went to the nursing station on the 3rd floor. Not because she was assigned there, not because she had a badge, but because Dara was there and Dara had a laptop, and Claire needed to pull the copies of the 2 incident reports from her personal cloud storage and get them to Farrow within the hour she'd promised. Dara looked up when she arrived. You look like something happened. Several things happened. Claire stood at the counter. I need to use your workstation for 10 minutes. The badge situation. I'm not logging in. I just need the browser. Dara slid the keyboard across without another word. The files took 4 minutes to locate, package, and send. Claire forwarded them to the email address Farrow had written on the back of her card, then cleared the browser history and slid the keyboard back. Who's Farrow? Dara asked. She'd clearly read the name over Claire's shoulder. Federal investigator. Dara's mouth opened slightly, then closed. Dara, Claire said, if someone comes to you, a federal investigator, not HR, and asks about what you've seen in this department, tell them the truth, all of it, including the things you didn't report because you didn't think it would go anywhere. Dara stared at her. Is this actually happening? Yes. Like, legally? Actually? There's a preliminary federal inquiry. It exists independent of anything involving me or Jonas Webb. What happened yesterday accelerated the timeline, but this was already in motion. Dara pressed both hands flat on the desk like she needed something solid. Pam filed 3 reports, she said quietly, over 6 years, all closed. She still has the originals because she printed them and took them home before they could be purged. Claire didn't say anything for a moment. "Tell her," she said finally. "Not from me. Just tell her it's time." She left the nursing station. The afternoon moved fast. By 2:30, the local news van had been joined by a second one, a regional affiliate this time with a satellite uplink already extended. Someone had talked to someone who had talked to a reporter, and the word military and the word suspended had combined in the way that words combine when there is a story underneath them that the public instinctively understands without needing the full details. Claire was in the fourth-floor corridor when her phone rang. Renata. "I'm watching the news," Renata said. "There's nothing on the news yet." There's a helicopter shot of the hospital parking lot and a chyron that says, "Military nurse suspend mid-rescue." That's something. Claire leaned against the corridor wall. "I'm not a military nurse. I'm a nurse who used to be military." That's a distinction the chyron does not make. A pause. "Are you okay?" "I'm tired," Claire said. It was the most honest answer she could give. That's allowed. "I haven't eaten since this morning." That is less allowed. Renata's voice softened slightly. "Claire, whatever happens today, you did the right thing. In that trauma bay, every part of it." "I know. I'm not sure you do, actually. I think you know it tactically. I'm not sure you've let yourself know it the other way." Claire said nothing. "Eat something," Renata said, "and call me tonight." She ate a protein bar from her bag in a stairwell on the second floor, which was not ideal but was efficient. She was coming back up the stairs to the fourth floor when she nearly walked into Dr. Elliot Park on the landing. He stopped. She stopped. The stairwell had that particular quality of institutional spaces that are rarely occupied, slightly too quiet, the sound of the building's ventilation system more audible than usual. Elliot looked like he hadn't slept well. "I heard about the DCIS inquiry," he said. "News travels." "I told HR the MTP call was correct," he said. "Yesterday, and again this morning when they came back. I'm on record." "I know, thank you." He was quiet for a moment. He was 31, she thought, maybe 32. He had the face of someone who was good at his job and had not yet been fully taught to hide that he was good at it. "I should have said something louder," he said. "In the bay, when he told you to step back. You confirmed the protocol. That's what mattered medically." "You know that's not all that mattered." She looked at him. "Elliot, you're a third-year resident. The power differential between you and Thorne is not nothing. The fact that you confirmed the treatment plan and you're on record, that took something. I'm not going to tell you it should have been more." He absorbed that. "Is there something I can do now, going forward?" "The DCIS agent is here today. Her name is Farrow. If she contacts you, tell her everything you remember. In sequence. Exactly as it happened." He nodded. "Yeah, okay." He looked down at the stairs for a moment. "He's been like this for a long time," he said quietly. "Longer than I've been here. Everyone just accommodated it because he was good in the OR and because it was easier." "I know," Claire said. That's not a good enough reason." "No," she said, "it isn't. But people usually figure that out after the fact." She left him in the stairwell and went back to the fourth floor. At 3:15, she was near the ICU nursing station when the doors at the end of the corridor opened and Marcus Thorne came through them. He was not in surgical whites now. He was in a suit jacket over his scrubs, the particular layering of a man who had come from a meeting and was on his way to another one. And he had two people with him. A woman Claire didn't recognize and a man she did, the hospital's in-house counsel. Thorne saw her. He did not stop walking, but he altered course, not dramatically, not visibly to anyone not watching closely, but his trajectory shifted in a way that would have brought him past her without direct engagement. She recognized the move, the tactical retreat that doesn't look like a retreat. She stepped into his path, not aggressively, just into the natural line of where he was going. He stopped. The two people with him stopped. "Dr. Thorne," she said. He looked at her the way he had looked at her for 14 months, the not quite focus, the registered obstacle expression, except that something had shifted underneath it, a new calculation running. "Ms. Voss," he said. His voice was controlled. I don't think we should be speaking directly. I'm not here to speak to you, she said. I'm on my way to check on my patient. I just wanted to pass through. She let the words sit there. My patient. He knew what she was doing. She could see that he knew. And she could see, in the very specific tightening around his jaw, that he had no response available to him in this corridor, in this moment, with two people watching and a federal investigator somewhere in the building. He moved around her. She did not watch him go. In room 412, Jonas was more alert than he'd been that morning. The sedation had been stepped down further, and he was sitting up at a slight angle with a food tray on the swing table that he'd made moderate progress on. He looked at her when she came in. I heard there are news vans, he said. 2. Somebody talked. Somebody always talks. He picked up a cup of broth and drank from it without ceremony. His color was better, not good. The blood loss had taken something that IV fluids and packed cells only partially replaced, and his body had a long accounting to do, but better than yesterday. Reese spoke to my commander this morning, he said. They know the full picture now. What happened in the ER? What happened before? He looked at her. Command is not happy. With me? With the hospital. He set the cup down. Claire, my commander has been in this job for 19 years. He's seen a lot of things that made him unhappy. He gets quiet when that happens. He was very quiet this morning. She sat in the chair by the window. What did you tell Reese? She asked. Everything. He said it without hedging. The deployment, the vehicle, what you did in the ER, all of it. He looked at her steadily. I know you didn't want that. I didn't ask you not to. No, but you didn't ask me to either, and I did it anyway, so I'm telling you. He paused. You spent 14 months in a building where nobody knew what you were, and you kept your head down, and you did the work, and when it mattered, you did the thing that needed to be done. And then someone who's been abusing people in this building for a decade made you the problem. He stopped. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that wasn't what happened. The monitor beside him beeped a slow rhythm. Outside the window, the Oregon sky was moving clouds in from the west at the speed that September moved things. I know, she said. Is that all you're going to say? What else is there? He looked at her for a long moment. You could say it wasn't worth it, keeping it quiet, staying small. I could, she said, but I don't know if that's true. I came here because I wanted to do the work without the history attached. I got that for 14 months. She looked at her hands. And then you showed up bleeding. Which is extremely on brand for me, he said. She almost smiled. It is. The door opened. Okafor came in without knocking, the kind of entrance that meant something needed to happen faster than politeness allowed. There's a development, Okafor said. She looked between them. 2 nurses just formally requested to speak with Agent Farrow. One of them has printed documentation. She paused. And Thorne's personal attorney arrived 20 minutes ago. He went straight to the executive floor. Jonas looked at Claire. How personal is his personal attorney? Jonas said. More interesting than that, Okafor said. His personal attorney previously represented the hospital in 3 separate civil matters involving staff complaints, 2 of which were filed against Thorne. The room was quiet. That's a conflict of interest, Claire said. It would appear so. Okafor's expression was careful. Farrow is already aware. She flagged it to the hospital's outside counsel about 15 minutes ago. They are apparently also now aware. A pause. The outside counsel asked Thorne's attorney to leave the executive floor. Did he leave? He's in the lobby, Okafor said. He does not appear to have left. Downstairs, the lobby was louder than it had been at 7 in the morning. Not chaotic. Hospitals kept chaos behind the scenes. But the particular quality of contained pressure that happens when too many things are moving in the same space. The 2 news crews had not been let inside, but their presence outside was changing the internal atmosphere in the way that external pressure always did, the way a weather system changed the feel of air before it actually arrived. Thorne's attorney, whose name Claire learned later was Leonard Pratt, was a tall man in his early 60s who had the comfortable authority of someone who had spent decades being the most important person in most rooms. He was seated in the lobby near the piano nobody played, and he was on his phone, and he was not leaving. Farrow was in a meeting room off the executive floor with the two nurses. Claire didn't know their names yet, but Okafor said one of them was named Vivian and had been in the department for 7 years. At 4:45, Claire's phone buzzed. A text from Dara. Pam just went up to the executive floor. She has a folder. And then, 3 minutes later, she's been in there 20 minutes. Farrow's with her. And then, 3 other people from our shift just asked to go up. Claire read the texts in the stairwell. She had gone back to the stairwell because the stairwell was quiet, and because she needed quiet the way she sometimes needed it. Not for rest, but for calibration. She sat on the second-floor landing with her back against the wall and her phone in her hand and listened to the building around her. The ventilation, the distant beep of monitors on the other side of a fire door, the sound of the elevator running up and down. This was the part nobody made movies about. Not the confrontation, not the revelation, not the moment the truth came out. The part where truth moved through a building via text messages and folders and quiet meetings in rooms with frosted glass. The slow mechanics of accountability trying to match the speed of damage that had run for years unimpeded. She had filed 2 reports. Pam had filed 3. There were others apparently who had documented and said nothing because saying something had not historically produced a different result than saying nothing. That was what Thorne had built over 11 years. Not just immunity from consequences, something more corrosive. A building full of people who had learned to absorb mistreatment rather than report it, because the reporting structure was controlled by the people doing the mistreating. A culture of looking away that had been so thoroughly normalized that nobody called it a culture anymore. They just called it how things were. How things were was ending. Claire was not naive enough to think it was ending cleanly. The outside counsel was reconfiguring. Pratt was in the lobby. There would be attorneys and reviews and timelines and the particular machinery of institutional accountability, which was slow and incomplete and sometimes failed. She knew that. But Pam was upstairs with a folder. Vivian was in a meeting room talking to a federal agent. 3 other people from the shift had asked to go up. That was the thing about patterns of harm. They required the silence of many people to persist. The moment that silence broke, the pattern became visible. And visible patterns were harder to defend. At 5:20, Okafor called her. "Reese needs you in the executive conference room," she said. "What's happening?" "Hospital administration wants to discuss terms for your immediate reinstatement pending the completion of the federal review." A pause. "Thorne's in there. He's been asked to be present." "And his attorney?" "Still in the lobby. The outside counsel has made it clear Pratt's prior representation creates issues that need to be resolved before he can be present for anything substantive." Claire stood up from the landing. "I'll be there in 3 minutes," she said. The executive conference room at 5:24 p.m. was a different room than it had been at 11 in the morning. Same furniture, same frosted window, same soft lighting that was designed to make difficult conversations feel civilized. But the composition had shifted. Reese was there. Finch. Sandra, from HR. 2 members of the outside legal team. Thorne was at the far end of the table, and he had the look of a man who had spent the last 6 hours managing a situation that had kept refusing to be managed. Farrow was not in the room, Claire noted. Her absence meant the criminal inquiry track was running separate from this administrative conversation, which was the correct and proper sequencing of things that were now formally 2 different proceedings. Finch opened. "Ms. Voss, we'd like to discuss the reinstatement of your access and credentials, effective immediately, while the formal review of the incident reports and yesterday's events proceeds." Claire sat. "I appreciate that. Additionally, the hospital would like to issue a formal acknowledgement that the conduct report filed yesterday was—" Finch glanced at her legal team. One of them gave a small nod. "Filed under incomplete information and does not reflect the hospital's assessment of your professional conduct." The language was careful and legal and meant something specific. Not an apology, not yet, but a door opening. "I accept that," Claire said. Thorne moved. Not much. A shift in the chair, the repositioning of a man who had something he needed to say and was deciding whether to say it. I want to be clear, he said, that my actions yesterday were based on what I understood to be a scope of practice issue. I did not have access to Ms. Voss's full professional background. The room waited. That may be true, Reese said. He looked at Thorne with the particular steadiness of someone who is not hostile and is also not moving. But the scope of practice question is one of several under review. The others are not dependent on Ms. Voss's background. The other matters are being handled by the appropriate investigators, Reese said. I'd recommend you speak to your attorney before this conversation goes further. Something crossed Thorne's face. A recognition of the exact location he was in, of the walls that had appeared around him while he was looking elsewhere. He stopped speaking. Finch moved through the administrative items efficiently after that. Claire's badge would be reinstated before end of business. Her schedule would be restored. A separate meeting would be scheduled to address the formal conduct record once the review reached its conclusion. It was all very procedural, very contained. The kind of resolution that sounded like resolution, but was actually the surface of something much larger still in motion underground. Claire accepted each point. She signed what needed to be signed. She did not perform relief, and she did not perform vindication because she felt neither, not exactly. What she felt was the particular alertness of someone who had come through an acute phase and was now in the longer, harder maintenance phase. The meeting ended at 6:10. She was in the elevator going down when her phone buzzed. Not a call this time. A text from Dara. Vivian's statement just got sent to DCIS. I don't know what's in it, but she was in there for 2 hours. Claire looked at the message, and then, before she could respond, a second text arrived. Different number. Elliott Park. Something's happening on the surgical floor. Thorne's surgical cases for tomorrow morning just got pulled from the schedule. All of them. I don't know if that came from admin or from someone above admin. Claire read it twice. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened into the lobby. Leonard Pratt was still near the piano, but he was standing now, phone pressed to his ear, his posture changed. No longer comfortable, no longer the most important person in the room. He was listening to whoever was on his phone with the careful, slightly rigid attention of a man who was being told something he did not want to hear. He looked up when the elevator doors opened. He looked at Claire. She crossed the lobby without breaking stride. Outside, the air had gone fully dark and cool. The 2 news vans were still there. The satellite dish on the second van was up now. Someone had a camera on a tripod facing the entrance, the shot framing the lit hospital facade against the dark Oregon sky. She was 3 steps past the door when her phone rang. Reese, she answered. Ms. Voss, he said. His voice was the same measured cadence as always. I want to make you aware of something before you hear it from another source. A pause. There's a secondary review request that came in approximately 20 minutes ago. It didn't come from DCIS and it didn't come from my office. She stopped walking. The camera on the tripod was 40 feet away. The reporter was talking to someone with a headset. The night air moved through the parking lot. Where did it come from? She said. The Inspector General's office, Reese said. They've been monitoring the inquiry. Given the pattern of closed reports and the length of time involved, they've opened their own track. She thought about it. That's broader. Considerably. A pause. It covers not just Dr. Thorne's conduct history. It covers the administrative response to reports over the past 9 years, who reviewed them, who closed them, who made those decisions. The implications of that settled over her. Not just Thorne. The people who had protected Thorne. The system that had made protection possible. The 11 years of a closed loop that had required at every stage active choices by people who had other choices available. Ms. Voss, Reese said, I need to ask you something. Go ahead. In your 14 months at this facility, did you have any direct interaction with administration, above the charge nurse level, regarding your filed incident reports? She stood in the parking lot with the cool air on her face and thought back through 14 months of filed-away moments, the precise chronology of them. The 2 reports, the closures, the silence, and then something else. A memory she had filed and labeled and set aside because, at the time, there had been nothing to attach it to, no framework that made it mean more than a passing discomfort. 3 weeks after her second incident report was closed, A meeting she had been called to. Not HR, above HR. A woman she had met once, the VP of Medical Operations, whose name was Janice Alderman. A brief meeting, 10 minutes, ostensibly about a schedule adjustment. And at the end of it, almost offhand, Alderman had said, "We appreciate your contribution to the department, Ms. Voss. We also find that these situations are best resolved internally. I hope you understand that." At the time, she had filed it, labeled it, set it in its location. "Yes," Claire said into the phone. "I had one." Reese was quiet for a moment. "Can you document it?" "I took notes the same day," she said. "I always take notes." Another silence, the kind that meant something was being processed that was larger than the individual pieces of it. "Ms. Voss," Reese said, "the IG is going to want to speak with you tomorrow morning." She looked at the lit hospital facade, the camera on the tripod, the satellite dish against the dark sky. Somewhere up on the fourth floor, Jonas Webb was eating hospital broth and getting his blood count stabilized, and would spend weeks recovering from a wound that she had kept from killing him in those 4 minutes in the trauma bay that existed outside of normal time. Somewhere on the executive floor, a woman named Janice Alderman was, presumably, having a very different evening than she had anticipated when the day began. "I'll be available," Claire said. She hung up. The reporter across the parking lot had turned toward the entrance, apparently cued by something in her earpiece, and was now looking directly at the hospital doors with the focused expression of someone who has just been told that the story is bigger than the story she came here for. She wasn't wrong. Inside the lobby, visible through the glass panels, Leonard Pratt had stopped listening to his phone. He had sat back down. His face, even at this distance, even through glass, had the particular gray quality of a man who had just understood that the room he'd walked into that afternoon was not the room he was currently in. Claire looked at him for a moment. Then she turned and walked toward her car and drove home to call her sister and eat something that wasn't a protein bar from a stairwell. And when she got there, she sat at her kitchen table for a long time before she did either of those things, just sitting in the quiet of her own space with the accumulated weight of the day settling into her bones. And she let herself feel the full measure of it. Not triumph, not relief, just the clean, stripped-down exhaustion of someone who had held a position long enough to see the tide shift and was still standing when it did. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't have saved. She opened it. 3 words. "She's been suspended." She stared at the message. 1 word back. "Who?" The response came in 4 seconds. "Alderman. Pending IG review. Effective 1 hour ago." Claire set the phone on the table. She looked at the wall. Outside, somewhere in the city, a woman who had sat across from her in a 10-minute meeting 3 years ago and told her that situations like hers were best resolved internally was learning what it meant when the resolution came from a direction she hadn't been watching. Claire picked up her phone and called Renata. "Talk to me," Renata said, before Claire could speak. "Alderman's been suspended," Claire said. Silence on the other end. Then, "Who's Alderman?" "VP of Medical Operations." Claire paused. "She was the one who told me to stay quiet." Renata didn't say anything for a long moment. "Claire," she said finally, her voice careful. "Yeah. That's not the end of this, is it?" Claire looked at the wall. "No," she said. "How much further does it go?" She thought about 9 years of closed reports, about a billing pattern that had triggered a DCIS inquiry before anyone knew who she was, about an attorney with conflict of interest problems sitting in a lobby, about a reporter with a satellite dish and an earpiece, and the expression of someone who had just been told the story was bigger. "I don't know yet," she said. And 3 miles away, in a hospital parking lot, a news camera was rolling, and the reporter was speaking to a lens pointed at a lit building. And what she was saying was, what would air on the 11 o'clock broadcast and clip onto social media by midnight and find its way to a national desk editor by 6 the following morning, was the beginning of a sentence that, once started, was going to be very difficult to stop. The 11 o'clock broadcast ran 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Claire watched it on her phone at the kitchen table with a bowl of reheated rice she hadn't finished and a glass of water she kept forgetting to drink. The reporter, whose name turned out to be Kelsey Marsh, according to the Chiron, had done something that most local news reporters didn't do, which was resist the simplest version of the story. She didn't lead with military hero nurse fired. She led with the billing irregularities. The DCIS inquiry. The pattern of closed complaints. She named Thorne once as the chief of surgery currently under federal review, and she named Harlow Valley Medical Center 4 times, and she mentioned a decorated military nurse whose credentials were not recognized by the institution without using Claire's name, which was either a legal precaution or a journalistic choice and possibly both. The segment ended with Marsh looking at the camera and saying that the hospital had declined to comment, that the DCIS had confirmed an inquiry was ongoing, and that 2 additional sources with direct knowledge of the institution had reached out to the station since the story broke online 6 hours earlier. 2 additional sources. Claire closed the video. She sat with that for a moment. 2 sources who had not been in any of the meetings today. 2 people who had seen the story beginning to surface and had decided, in the window between this is happening and this is public, that they had something to add to it. That was how it spread. Not in one dramatic disclosure, but in the accumulation of small decisions made by individual people who had been waiting separately for a reason. She finished the rice. She called Renata back and talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. Renata's kids, a problem with the gutters, a restaurant Renata had been to that she thought Claire would like. Normal things. The deliberate practice of a person who understood that returning to normal things after abnormal days was not avoidance, it was maintenance. She slept better than the night before. Not well, but better. By 6 the next morning, the national desk had picked it up. She found out from Okafor, who texted at 6:08. National affiliate ran a piece at 5:45. Reese has been briefed. IG interview is confirmed for 09:30. Hospital PR team is apparently in crisis mode. And then, a minute later, also Thorne's surgical privileges have been formally suspended pending review. That came from the CMO's office last night at 11:30. Claire read it twice. The sequence mattered. The CMO had moved after the broadcast, not before it, which meant the internal machinery had been waiting on the external pressure to provide sufficient cover for a decision that had been available to them for a long time. That was not surprising. That was, in fact, entirely characteristic of how institutions moved, not at the speed of evidence, but at the speed of exposure. She had watched it happen in other contexts, in other organizations, and the mechanism was always the same. The decision-makers didn't act when they knew. They acted when the cost of inaction became visible to people outside the building. She drove to the hospital. The IG interview happened in a conference room that wasn't the executive conference room, a smaller one on the 2nd floor, with a window that looked at a ventilation shaft. The IG investigator's name was Thomas Wren. He was 50-something, thin, with the economical manner of someone who had spent decades interviewing people who were either protecting themselves or trying to be useful, and had developed the ability to distinguish between the two very quickly. He was useful, which was to say direct. "I want to focus on the alderman meeting," he said within the first 5 minutes. Claire walked him through it. The timing, 3 weeks after her second incident report was closed. The context, the ostensible schedule discussion that turned out to be 10 minutes of administrative management. The exact words Alderman had used, which Claire had written down the same day in a note on her phone that she still had. She showed him the note. He read it. He made a copy. "Did she reference the incident reports directly?" he asked. "Not by name," she said, "these situations." In context, the meaning was clear. "And you understood it as a directive to not file further reports?" "I understood it as a statement about what the administration preferred." "Yes." Wren wrote something down. "In your 14 months at this facility, did you observe or have knowledge of any other staff who were discouraged, formally or informally, from filing conduct reports?" "I had indirect knowledge," she said. "Conversations. Nothing documented from my end." "Who would have direct knowledge?" "Pam Nguyen, charge nurse, ER. And possibly Vivian. I don't have her last name. She spoke with Agent Farrow yesterday." Wren made notes. One more question, he said. The billing irregularities that triggered the DCIS inquiry, do you have any direct knowledge of those? No, I learned about them the same time you're hearing me describe learning about them. Yesterday, from Pharaoh. He looked at her over the legal pad. But you're not surprised. She thought about that. A person who conducts his professional relationships the way Thorne conducted his, she said, probably conducts other professional matters the same way. That's not evidence. That's a behavioral inference. Wren set down his pen. Ms. Voss, in your military career, did you have occasion to conduct interviews of this kind? Different format. Same basic mechanics. Then you know I'm going to tell you that what you just said is exactly the kind of thing I was hoping someone would say. She almost smiled. The interview ran an hour and 40 minutes. She left the conference room at 11:20 and stood in the hallway and felt the particular draining quality of sustained precision, the effort of saying things carefully and only once and in sequence, which was more exhausting than most people thought. Dara found her near the elevator. You look like you need coffee. I need coffee. They went to the break room, the charge nurse break room, not the attending physician break room, which was a distinction that had become, in the past 48 hours, more explicitly relevant than usual. Dara poured. They sat. 6 people talked to Pharaoh yesterday, Dara said, after you left. I heard. Pam's statement was 3 pages. Dara wrapped both hands around her mug. She documented dates, specific incidents, specific language. 6 years of it. She paused. I didn't know she'd been keeping records that long. People keep records when they've learned that records are the only thing that protects them, Claire said. Dara looked at her. Did you know it was this bad before yesterday? Claire considered the question honestly. I knew what I'd seen. I suspected the volume was larger. I didn't know the full scope. She drank the coffee. It was good. Actual good. Not comparatively good for a hospital break room. Is Pam all right? She cried for about 20 minutes after she came out of the interview, and then she went back on shift. Dara paused. Which is very Pam. It is. Are you all right? The question was direct enough that it deserved a direct answer. Claire thought about it. I'm tired, she said, and I keep waiting for the other shoe. What other shoe? I don't know. That's the problem with it. The other shoe arrived at 1:45 p.m. She was in the ER on a patient, a genuine patient, back on her badge and her schedule as of that morning, a 60-year-old man named Harold, who'd come in with what looked like an acute M1 and was in the process of being confirmed, when her phone buzzed with a message from Okafor that she didn't see until she'd handed Harold off to the cardiology team. Call me when you can. Thorne filed a civil complaint this morning, defamation and interference with professional practice. Named you personally. She read it in the corridor outside the cardiology intake area. She read it again. Then she called Okafor. His attorney filed it this morning, Okafor said, before the surgical privileges suspension came through from the CMO. The timing suggests he either didn't know that was coming or filed as a preemptive move. Or both, Claire said. Or both. The complaint names you, Elliot Park, Vivian Ortega. That was the last name, apparently. And Agent Pharaoh in her individual capacity, which is legally interesting and probably not going to survive a motion to dismiss, but it's filed. What are the grounds? Defamatory statements made to federal investigators and media, tortious interference with his professional relationship with the hospital. Okafor's voice had the measured quality of someone reading from a document. He's claiming the conduct described in the statements was mischaracterized, and that the collective effect of those statements caused the suspension of his privileges and damaged his reputation. Claire stood in the corridor for a moment. He filed a defamation complaint, she said, while under federal investigation for billing fraud. That is, in fact, the sequence of events, yes. She thought about Thorne in that conference room 2 days ago. The stillness of a man recalibrating, the jaw moving slightly, and underneath it, apparently, not recalibration at all. Calculation. The decision to attack outward rather than absorb. Is this a problem? She said. For you? Honestly, probably not. Statements made to federal investigators have qualified privilege, which means defamation claims based on them face a high threshold. The The media piece is more nuanced, but you didn't give a named statement to any media outlet. A pause. For Elliot and Vivian, it's more complicated. They're not covered by the same protections. They're being sued for telling the truth. They're being sued, yes. Whether it survives is a different question. Claire exhaled slowly. Who do I call about getting them legal support? That's already in motion. The hospital's outside counsel has informally indicated that any staff who gave statements in the context of the federal inquiry may be covered under the hospital's indemnity policy, but informally indicated is not a guarantee. How do I make it a guarantee? A pause. You could start by talking to someone who has more leverage over the hospital than you currently do. Which means Reese. She called Reese. He answered in 2 rings. I heard, he said. Elliot Park and Vivian Ortega need to be covered. I agree. He was quiet for a beat. The hospital's indemnification needs to be formalized today. I'm going to make a call to Finch's office. Not a request, a strong recommendation from someone whose signature on the military patient services contract renewals carries some weight. Does it? Let's find out. He paused. Ms. Voss, the defamation filing is a mistake on his part. I want you to understand that. A man under federal investigation does not file civil complaints against federal investigators and come out of it better than he went in. He's not thinking about coming out of it better, she said. He's thinking about making it expensive for everyone else to keep going. Reese was quiet for a moment. You've seen this before, he said. I've seen variations. So have I. He sounded tired in a way that he hadn't sounded before. Not defeated, just honest. I'll call Finch. Give me an hour. By 3 o'clock, the hospital's outside counsel had issued a formal written statement confirming indemnification for staff who provided statements to federal investigators in connection with the ongoing review. It was not everything and it was not permanent, but it was documented and it was same day, which meant someone with the ability to move that process quickly had moved it. Dara texted, Vivian's been in Pam's office for 20 minutes. Not sure if that's crying or planning or both. Probably both. Claire sent back, tell her the indemnification is confirmed. A minute later, she says, tell Reese thank you. At 4:30, something happened that nobody had anticipated. One of Thorne's own residents, not Elliot Park, a different one, a second-year named Aaron Sutherland, went to Farrow's office, which had been set up in a temporary administrative space on the ground floor, and asked to make a statement. He was in there for 2 hours. Claire didn't find out what was in the statement that evening. She found out 3 days later, when enough of it had moved through the appropriate channels to be discussable in a non-confidential context. And what she found out was this. Sutherland had direct knowledge of a specific instance in which Thorne had altered a surgical report to conceal a procedural complication. He had witnessed it. He had said nothing at the time because he was a second-year resident and Thorne controlled his evaluation scores and his future letters of recommendation. He had kept notes on his phone, dated and time-stamped. People kept records when they'd learned that records were the only thing that protected them. But that came 3 days later. On this day, at 4:30 p.m., what Claire knew was that a second-year resident was in a room with a federal agent and had been there for 2 hours, which was longer than most people spent making a short statement, and which meant the statement was not short. At 5:15, she went upstairs to see Jonas. He was sitting up fully now, the back of the bed adjusted to nearly vertical, the food tray completely cleared for the first time since his arrival. His color was better in a way that was now genuinely measurable rather than relative. Less gray, more present. He still moved his right leg carefully, keeping his weight distributed away from it, but the monitoring lines had been reduced from 5 to 2, and the pressure cuff was gone. You're improving, she said. The bar was low. He looked at her. You look like you've been through something today. Thorne filed a civil complaint. Name me and 2 others. Jonas looked at her steadily for a moment. Is it going to be a problem? Reese is handling it. That's not what I asked. No, she said. I don't think it's going to be a problem. He nodded, accepted it. Physical therapy starts tomorrow, he said. First session. They want to see weight bearing by end of next week. That's aggressive. I requested it. He looked at his leg. I've been down longer than this in worse conditions and come back. I'd rather be uncomfortable and moving than comfortable and still. She recognized that. She had the same preference and knew from experience that it was the right call for some people and the wrong call for others. And for Jonas, it was clearly the right call. There's something I want to ask you, he said. Go ahead. After this is over, all of it, the investigation, the legal pieces, whatever the hospital ends up doing, he looked at her directly. What do you want? The question surprised her, not because it was unexpected from Jonas, but because she hadn't asked it of herself yet. She'd been in operational mode for 48 hours, moving from thing to thing with the efficiency of someone managing a situation, and she hadn't stopped to ask what the situation was supposed to produce, what the outcome she actually wanted looked like. I want to keep doing the work, she said. Here? She looked at the window, at the Oregon sky doing its slow September thing. I don't know. Here was fine until it wasn't. There are good people here, and the work is the work, regardless of where it happens. You could go back, he said, to the service. I aged out of the operational side. There are other sides. She looked at him. Are you recruiting me right now? From an ICU bed? I'm asking a question. It's a very pointed question for someone with an IV in his arm. He almost smiled. Just think about it. She left the room at 5:40 and was in the elevator when her phone buzzed. A number she recognized this time. Pharaoh. I wanted to update you on something, Pharaoh said. It's going to be in the public record by tomorrow, so I'd rather you hear it from me. Okay. The billing review expanded this morning. We pulled 3 years of records. The irregularity pattern is not isolated to one procedure type. A pause. We found 47 claims across 4 procedure categories that show documentation inconsistencies. The dollar amount is not small. Claire stood in the elevator. The doors had closed. She hadn't pressed a floor. How not small, she said. That's for the attorneys to quantify. Pharaoh's voice was careful and deliberate. What I can tell you is that it's large enough that this is no longer a preliminary inquiry. You're opening a formal investigation. We opened it this morning. Another pause. I also want to tell you that your incident reports, the 2 you filed, are going to be specifically referenced in the formal investigation file as part of a documented pattern of institutional suppression of staff concerns. Your name will appear in a federal document in that context. The elevator was still sitting on the 4th floor. The doors had not opened. She had not pressed a button. Does that concern you? Pharaoh asked. No, Claire said. It will make your name public in a different way than the news coverage. I know. Some people prefer not to be in federal documents. I filed those reports because I wanted them to matter, Claire said. If they matter enough to be in a federal document, that's what they were for. A pause. All right, I'll be in touch. Claire pressed the button for the ground floor. She walked out of the elevator and through the lobby, past the information desk where Kevin was on shift again, past the piano nobody played. She pushed through the side door into the evening air and stood outside for a moment. The news vans were gone. That was something. The story had moved from the site of origin into the wider current of things, and the vans had followed it to wherever it went next. Her phone buzzed. Dara, can you come back to the ER for a minute? Not a patient thing. She went back in. Dara was at the nursing station with Pam, who was in her regular clothes rather than scrubs, which meant her shift had ended. Pam looked like someone who had been carrying weight for a long time and had recently set some of it down, but had not yet fully registered the change in what her body was doing. She looked tired and something else that wasn't quite the opposite of tired, but was adjacent to it. I wanted to say something, Pam said, before we all went home. Claire waited. When you filed those first 2 reports, Pam said, I was the one who had to send them up. You know that. I forwarded them to HR the same day. She paused. I also knew they were going to be closed. I knew because I'd sent up 3 of my own over 6 years and watched all of them disappear. Another pause. Longer. I should have said something to you when I forwarded them. I should have said, I know where this goes. I should have warned you. Claire looked at her for a moment. Pam, she said, you were protecting yourself. You were in a system that had taught you, very consistently, what happened to people who pushed. I don't hold that against you." "I know." Pam's voice was steady but effortful. "I'm not asking you to hold it against me. I'm saying I'm sorry anyway, because I knew and I didn't tell you, and that's something I get to live with." The nursing station was quiet. The ER behind them was the usual low hum of a weekday early evening. Claire nodded once. "Okay," she said. "Okay meaning you accept it?" "Okay meaning I hear you. And what you did with Pharaoh, the 3 pages. That matters more than anything you could have done 2 years ago." She looked at Pam directly. "The work you did this week is going to protect the next person who works here. That's not nothing." Pam pressed her lips together. She nodded once. She picked up her bag and her jacket and went home. Dara watched her go, then looked at Claire. "Is it really going to protect the next person? Who works here?" "Depends on what the hospital does with all of this," Claire said. "If administration treats this as a legal problem to be managed, probably not. If they treat it as an institutional failure to be addressed," she paused, "possibly. Which do you think it'll be?" She thought about Finch in the conference room, the careful language, the legal team's nods, the indemnification confirmed same day, a VP suspended by evening. "I think they're scared enough right now to do the right things," she said. "Whether that lasts is a different question." It was not a satisfying answer. Dara looked like she wanted a more satisfying answer. Claire didn't have one to give. She left the hospital at 7. She ate dinner that was not a protein bar. She talked to Renata. She slept through the night without waking, which was the best sleep she'd gotten since the week before the helicopter landed. The following days had a rhythm to them, not calm, but patterned. The DCIS formal investigation generated requests, interviews, document productions. The IG track ran parallel. Thorne's civil complaint moved into a legal process that, as Reese had predicted, began encountering significant procedural resistance almost immediately. The qualified privilege arguments held, the claims against Pharaoh were dismissed in the initial response filing, and the hospital's outside counsel filed a notice that the institution would not be cooperating with discovery requests from Thorne's personal legal team in any matter adverse to current staff. That last piece was the one that mattered most to Claire. Not for herself, for Elliot, for Vivian, for the nurses who had come forward. By the end of the first week, Thorne's surgical privileges had not been reinstated. By the end of the second week, the state medical board had opened its own review of his licensure, triggered by the DCIS billing findings and the conduct documentation submitted by Pharaoh's office. Thorne retained a second attorney, a criminal defense specialist, and stopped appearing in the hospital building entirely. Sutherland's statement about the altered surgical report had been corroborated, it turned out, by 2 other people who had been in that OR. Neither of them had come forward initially. Both had come forward in the week after Sutherland went to Pharaoh. The domino effect was not smooth or cinematic. It was messy and incremental, and sometimes it stopped for days at a time while legal processes caught up with factual findings, and sometimes information came out in the wrong order and had to be recontextualized, and sometimes people who had seemed ready to speak pulled back and needed more time. Reality was not a narrative. It did not pace itself for effect, but it moved. 11 days after Jonas Webb's helicopter landed on the roof, Claire was eating lunch alone in the break room when Finch's assistant called and asked if she was available to meet with the CEO that afternoon at 3. She said yes. She went back to her sandwich. It was a good sandwich: turkey, sharp cheddar, grain mustard, from the deli 2 blocks from the hospital that she'd started going to in the mornings. Small things. The maintenance of ordinary life alongside the extraordinary one. The 3 o'clock meeting with Finch was in the CEO's office, not the conference room. A distinction. The office was smaller, more personal. A bookshelf with actual books on it. A window that faced east and caught the afternoon light at an angle that made the room feel less institutional than the rest of the building. Finch was alone. That was also a distinction. She offered Claire coffee. Claire accepted. "I'll be direct," Finch said. "Please." "The investigations are ongoing, and I can't speak to their outcomes. What I can speak to is the hospital's position on internal matters." She held her coffee with both hands. The conduct documentation that came out of this week's statements Goes well beyond what I was told was in the personnel files. Significantly beyond. I want you to know that I'm treating that discrepancy as its own matter. Between you and Alderman, Claire said, among others. Yes, but Finch's expression was careful but not closed. I also want to tell you that Dr. Thorne's privileges have been formally terminated, not suspended pending review, terminated. Effective this morning. The board voted last night. The word terminated was different from suspended. Terminated was final in a way that suspended was not. The medical board review will proceed on its own timeline, Finch continued, but the hospital's relationship with Dr. Thorne is over. Claire drank her coffee. Outside the east-facing window, the afternoon light was doing that amber thing it did in September, coming in low and long through the trees. Why are you telling me this directly? She said. Finch looked at her for a moment. Because you're the person who was standing in a corridor 2 weeks ago being told to step back. I thought you deserved to hear it in a room, from a person, not from a text message or a news report. Claire considered that. It was not an apology. It was something smaller than an apology and something more personal than an administrative statement, and she respected the precision of it. Thank you, she said. They sat in the office for a few more minutes. The conversation moved through practical things, scheduling, the investigation cooperation requirements, the timeline for the formal review of her incident reports, and their reclosure. She was at the door when Finch said, Ms. Voss. She turned. There's going to be a structural review of the reporting system, Finch said, how reports are handled, who reviews them, what the accountability chain looks like. She paused. I'd like your input on that. Not formally, not as a committee member, just your experience. You can have it, Claire said. She left the office. In the hallway, her phone buzzed, a text from Elliott Park. Medical board confirmed receipt to keep receipt of the conduct documentation. Thorne's got a hearing in 6 weeks, and then, before she could respond, another buzz. A different number. A name she recognized. Aaron Sutherland. I wanted to tell you I heard about the civil complaint being dropped against you. I'm glad. A pause in the text represented by a new message. Also, I know you don't know me and I didn't do what I did because of you specifically. But knowing someone else had said something first made it easier. Just wanted you to know that. She read it twice. She stood in the hallway outside the CEO's office and thought about the specific chain of it, the 2 reports she'd filed that had gone nowhere, the 14 months of keeping her head down, the coffee cup in the trash, and Jonas Webb, bleeding, asking for her by rank. The thing that broke the pattern had not been the investigation. It had not been Reese or Farrow or the IG. It had been a soldier waking up in an ICU bed and saying a name, and that name pulling a thread, and the thread unraveling something that had been badly, carefully, deliberately knotted for 11 years. She texted Sutherland back, "Thank you for telling me." She started toward the elevator. Her phone rang. Okafor. "You need to know something," Okafor said without greeting. Her voice had a different quality than usual. Not alarmed, but tightly controlled in a way that was its own kind of alarm signal. "What is it?" "Thorne's attorney, not Pratt, the criminal defense one he brought on last week, filed something this morning." A pause. "He's claiming that his client was the target of a coordinated retaliation campaign orchestrated by a former military operative with access to federal channels and a personal grievance against the hospital." Claire stopped walking. "A former military operative," she repeated. "He's essentially arguing that you orchestrated this, that your military background and your contacts gave you the ability to weaponize a federal investigation against a physician who had legitimately disciplined you for a scope of practice violation." She stood in the hallway. She thought about the 14 months, the 2 reports, the coffee cup, the 4 minutes in the trauma bay. Walking out through the side door with her badge in her hand at 4:47 p.m. because she had been suspended in the middle of saving someone's life. "He's claiming I did this to him," she said. "That's what the filing says." She was quiet for a moment. "Okafor," she said, "the DCIS billing inquiry, when exactly was it opened?" A pause, the sound of something being checked. 14 days before Jonas Webb's helicopter landed. "So before I was suspended?" "Correct." "Before I was involved in any of this at all?" "Yes." She let that settle. A man under federal investigation for financial fraud was now claiming that a nurse with a suspended badge had orchestrated the investigation that had started 2 weeks before she became publicly relevant. That was the argument. That was what his attorney had filed. It was, she realized, not an argument designed to win. It was an argument designed to muddy. To create enough noise and complication that the next phase of proceedings would have to spend time and resources clearing the air, which would slow things down, which would give him more time, which was the only strategy left to someone who had run out of better options. She had seen this too, in other contexts. The last move of someone who has lost the position and knows it and is choosing to make the retreat as costly as possible for everyone else. What happens now? She said. Pharaoh's response is going to be that the inquiry predates your involvement and that the claim is factually unsupported, Okafor said. The IG's office said essentially the same thing. They issued a statement an hour ago clarifying that their review was triggered by internal audit flags, not by any external party. So it's already answered. Factually, yes. Legally and procedurally, a pause. It's going to be in the record. Even when it's answered, it's going to be in the record, and his attorneys are going to use it to slow down the timeline. She started walking again, toward the elevator. Down. There's something else, Okafor said. Her voice had shifted again, more careful. A journalist at a national outlet, not local, national, reached out to Reese's office this morning. She's working on a long-form piece. She wants to interview you. About what specifically? About all of it. The nursing conduct complaint structure, military background, and credential disclosure. What happened in that trauma bay and what happened after? A pause. She said the piece is going to run regardless. She'd rather have your voice in it than not. The elevator arrived. Claire stepped in. She thought about Sutherland's text. Knowing someone else had said something first made it easier. She thought about Pam's 3 pages. Vivian's 2 hours with Pharaoh. 6 people who had come forward after 1. A long-form piece. National. About all of it. Send me her contact information, Claire said. Are you sure? The elevator doors closed. She looked at her reflection in the polished metal. Not a mirror, just the distorted, functional version of herself that showed up in elevator doors. Scrubs. Badge. The lanyard that had been returned to her 4 days ago, clipped back to her chest pocket where it had always been. Send it, she said. The elevator reached the ground floor. The doors opened. And standing in the lobby directly across from the elevator, not near the piano, not near the security desk, not looking at his phone, was Marcus Thorne. He was in street clothes, no surgical whites, no coat, no hospital ID. He had the look of a man who had arrived somewhere and was deciding whether leaving was still an option or whether he had, by arriving, already committed to something. He looked at her. She looked at him. The lobby between them was empty of other people in the particular way that lobbies sometimes were. A gap between the arrival of one group and the next, 30 feet of polished floor and soft light, and the piano nobody played. He took a step toward her, and Claire saw in his hand a folded document. He stopped about 8 feet from her. The document in his hand was folded once, lengthwise, the way people fold things when they're carrying them and not sure what to do with them. Not the deliberate fold of someone delivering something, more the crumple of a person who had been holding the same piece of paper for a long time. Claire did not move toward him. She did not move away. Dr. Thorne, she said. He looked worse than she'd seen him look. Not sick, not the kind of worse that was physical, the kind that happened when a person's external structure had been load-bearing in ways they hadn't noticed until the structure started coming apart. He'd shaved recently, but not carefully. His suit jacket was the right jacket for the wrong day. I came to... He stopped. He looked down at the document in his hand. My attorney doesn't know I'm here. That's probably relevant information for your attorney. I know. He looked up. I wanted to give you this directly. He extended the document. She crossed the 8 feet between them and took it. She unfolded it without taking her eyes off him first, then looked down. It was a letter. Handwritten on plain paper, not letterhead. His handwriting was smaller than she would have expected. Precise. slightly compressed, the handwriting of someone who had spent decades writing in medical charts where space was finite. She read it. It was not an apology in the legal sense. It did not contain the words, "I'm sorry," in any combination. What it contained was a statement, 3 paragraphs, handwritten, that acknowledged, in his own words, that his actions on the day she was suspended had not been based on protocol, but on the automatic assumption that a nurse could not know more than a physician about a clinical situation, that he had been wrong, that the actions taken under that assumption had been harmful, and that the harm was his responsibility. 3 paragraphs. No lawyers involved. She folded it again along the same crease. "Why?" she said. He looked at her steadily, not with the registered obstacle expression, not with the recalibrating expression, with something that was, she thought, closer to honest. "Because my attorney is going to handle everything else," he said. "And I didn't want everything else to be all there was." She looked at him for a long moment. "This doesn't change the investigations," she said. "I know. Or the billing review, or the medical board. I know. Or what the people who worked under you for 11 years experienced." He absorbed that. Something in his face tightened, and then deliberately relaxed. "I know," he said again. His voice was quieter on the third one. She looked down at the folded letter in her hand. She had not expected this. She had expected the civil complaint maneuvering, the coordinated retaliation filing, the delay tactics of a man trying to slow an avalanche with his hands. She had not expected him to walk into a lobby with a handwritten letter. People were surprising in their worst moments. They were occasionally also surprising in the moments just past the worst. "I'm going to keep this," she said. He nodded. "Not as a legal document," she said. "Not for any of the proceedings, just—" She looked at it. "Because it's the only honest thing that's happened between us." He didn't say anything to that. He turned and walked out of the lobby. Not quickly. Not the stride of a man making an exit. The walk of someone who had done the one thing on the list that he'd actually had control over and didn't know what came after it. She watched him go. Then she went to the nursing station and put the letter in her bag and went back to work, because work was what there was, and work was, in the end, the thing she had come here for. The weeks that followed were not a straight line toward resolution. They were the irregular stop-and-start motion of multiple processes running at different speeds in different jurisdictions, occasionally intersecting and occasionally cutting across each other in ways that required new documents, new meetings, new explanations to people who had only seen one piece of the picture. The DCIS formal investigation produced its first significant finding in the 4th week. 47 billing discrepancies confirmed, total irregular claims value assessed at just under $400,000 across 3 years of surgical billing. The number was large enough to change the nature of the proceedings from an audit matter to a criminal referral. Thorne's criminal defense attorney filed 3 motions in the first week of the referral. All 3 were procedurally standard, and none of them changed anything except the timeline. The state medical board hearing happened 6 weeks after the initial review was triggered. Claire was not a party to those proceedings and did not attend. She learned the outcome the way most of the hospital staff learned it, through Dara, who had a contact in the administrative offices, who texted her when decisions came down. The text arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. Board voted 7-2. License suspended indefinitely pending outcome of criminal proceedings. No surgical privileges at any licensed facility in the state. Indefinitely was not permanent, but indefinitely, in the context of a criminal referral with a $400,000 finding, meant something close enough to permanent that the distinction was mostly semantic. Janice Alderman resigned from her position as VP of Medical Operations in the 5th week, ahead of a formal termination that the IG investigation had made functionally inevitable. She issued a statement through an attorney that described her departure as voluntary. Nobody who had been paying attention used the word voluntary without qualification. The civil complaint Thorne had filed against Claire, Elliot, and Vivian was withdrawn in the 6th week. Not dismissed, withdrawn. His attorney filed the withdrawal without comment, and the case closed. Elliot texted Claire when it happened. "It's gone." And then, a minute later, "How are you not more excited about this?" She texted back, "I'm eating lunch." He sent back a laughing emoji and then a second text. Fair. The long-form piece ran in the 7th week. The journalist's name was Patricia Graves, and she was the kind of writer who took 8 weeks to do what a news reporter did in 8 hours. Not because she was slow, but because she was building something different. She spoke to Claire 4 times over 6 weeks. She also spoke to Jonas, to Dara, to Pam, to Elliot, to Vivian, to Okafor, to Reese, to Aaron Sutherland, to 3 other former Harlow Valley staff who had left the hospital in the prior 5 years, and to 2 additional nursing associations whose data on conduct report closure rates formed the structural backbone of what the piece became. It was not a story about Claire exactly. It was a story about what institutions do with the people who tell them something is wrong. Claire was the thread the reader followed, but the fabric was much larger. The pattern of suppression that showed up in Graves's reporting, not just at Harlow Valley, but across the healthcare sector, at a scale that was, once laid out numerically, difficult to read without a specific and concrete anger. The piece was published on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, it had been shared widely enough that Patricia Graves's editor called her to say the traffic was unlike anything they'd run that year. By Thursday, 3 congressional staffers had reached out to Graves, requesting the underlying data for a potential committee inquiry into nursing conduct complaint systems at federally funded medical institutions. Claire read the piece once, carefully, on the morning it published. She was in the break room with a good coffee. Not great, the machine was acting up again, but acceptable, and she read it in one sitting without stopping. She appeared on the 9th paragraph. Graves had described her in a single sentence that was more precise than any sentence most people ever had written about them. A combat trauma specialist who had learned, in the military, that competence and rank were not the same thing, and who spent 14 months at Harlow Valley Medical Center discovering that civilian medicine had its own version of the same lesson. That was it. That was the whole of her, compressed into one sentence, which was both reductive and more accurate than she'd expected. She finished the coffee and went to work. Jonas was discharged on day 19 after the helicopter landing. He walked out of the elevator under his own power, moving with the careful, deliberate gait of someone who had been told by 3 separate medical professionals to be patient with the leg, and had decided that patient meant something slightly more aggressive than what they had in mind. Okafor was there. Reese had sent a car. Claire happened to be on the floor for a patient check, which was not coincidence because she had looked at his discharge time and arranged to be on that floor, and she didn't pretend otherwise. He saw her in the corridor. "I'm vertical," he said. "I can see that. Under my own power." Also visible. He was using a cane, not because he needed it entirely, but because the vascular repair was still stabilizing and the surgical team had been extremely clear about what the consequences of a misstep would be. And Jonas, unlike with the physical therapy timeline, had accepted this particular compromise without argument. The cane was aluminum, adjustable, entirely utilitarian, and he held it the way someone holds something they regard as temporary equipment rather than a new feature of their life. "Walk me out?" he said. She walked him out. In the elevator, going down, he was quiet for a moment. Then, "The piece ran." "I know." "Congressional staffers." "I heard." He looked sideways at her. "You okay with all of that?" She thought about it honestly, the way she'd been trying to think about things since the parking lot, since the night at the kitchen table, since the moment she'd decided that the version of herself that kept her head down had run its course. "I'm okay with the outcome," she said. "The process of getting here was—" She paused. "Not what I would have chosen." "Nobody chooses their moment," he said. "You know that." "I know. You just choose what you do when it arrives." The elevator opened into the lobby. They walked through it, past the piano, past the security desk where Kevin gave Jonas a nod that Jonas returned, out through the main doors into the October air that had replaced September's amber with something sharper and more honest. The car Reese had sent was at the curb, a driver in civilian clothes, door already open. Jonas stopped at the curb. He looked at the building behind them, then at Claire. "I meant what I said," he said, "about options, for what comes next." "I know you did. I'm not pushing, I'm just saying the door is open." She looked at the hospital, at the limestone facade and the glass panels and the helipad on the roof where his helicopter had sat 17 days ago, with its rotors folded and nobody knowing yet what it had brought in. "I need to finish something here first," she said. "What?" "Making sure it's actually fixed, not just managed." She looked at him. "There's a difference." He studied her for a moment, the cane in one hand, the October light on his face, which was fuller than it had been in the ICU, closer to the face she remembered from a mountainside years ago. "Yeah," he said, "there is." He got into the car. She watched it pull away from the curb and merge into the mid-morning traffic, and she stood on the sidewalk for a minute in the October air before going back inside. The structural review of the reporting system that Finch had mentioned was not a fast process. It was not supposed to be. It involved an external consulting firm, interviews with current and former staff, an audit of the closure decisions on reports going back 7 years, and a proposed framework that would route conduct complaints through an independent third-party review board rather than exclusively through the hospital's internal HR chain. Claire was not on the committee. She had not asked to be. What she had done, as Finch had requested, was provide her experience, 3 conversations over 6 weeks with the external consultant, specific and practical, about what the system had failed to do and what a functional system needed to do differently. She spoke about documentation, about the importance of time-stamped, preserved records that could not be altered by the parties being reported, about the specific chilling effect of a system where the people responsible for reviewing complaints were also professionally dependent on the people being complained about. She spoke about what it felt like to file a report and watch it disappear. Not the emotion of it, but the practical consequence, the knowledge, installed and permanent, that the system was not built to work for you, which meant everything you did from that point forward was adjusted for a system that wasn't working. The consultant was a woman named Dr. Farida Osei, who had done this work at 4 hospitals in 2 states, and who listened with the focused attention of someone building a structure she had built before but needed to build correctly for this particular site. "Do you think the proposed framework will work?" Osei asked in their 3rd conversation. Claire thought about it. "It will work better," she said. "That's not the same as working. Working depends on whether the people at the top of the institution actually want it to work. The structure can be right and still fail if the culture doesn't support it." "And the culture here?" "Changing," Claire said. "I don't know how far. I don't know how permanently." She paused. "That's an honest answer." "It's the right answer," Osei said. "The criminal referral against Thorne moved through the federal process in the particular way federal processes moved. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with a grinding, relentless forward momentum that was more durable than the dramatic version because it didn't depend on attention or narrative. By the 12th week, a grand jury had been convened. By the 16th, an indictment was returned on 3 counts of healthcare fraud and 1 count of obstruction. The obstruction charge related to Sutherland's documentation of the altered surgical report. The altered surgical report was, in the end, the detail that changed the texture of everything. Billing fraud was financial. Obstruction was behavioral. But an altered surgical report was clinical. It was a falsification of a patient's medical record for the purpose of concealing a complication, which put it in a different moral category than the other charges because it was not about money. It was about a patient who had a complication they did not know about, whose subsequent care might have been different if they had, who had been specifically and deliberately kept in the dark by the physician responsible for their care. When that became public, and it became public the day the indictment was filed, because indictments are public documents, the response was different from the response to the billing irregularities. The billing response had been institutional, boards and reviewers and licensing bodies. The surgical report response was personal. It was people in waiting rooms and online spaces and work break rooms saying the thing that people said when an abstract principle about trust becomes concrete. What if it had been me? Thorne's attorney entered a not guilty plea on his behalf. The trial date was set for the following year. The proceedings between the indictment and the trial were their own long machinery, separate from everything else, running on their own calendar. Leonard Pratt, who had represented the hospital in 3 prior civil matters involving Thorne, was the subject of a separate bar complaint filed by 2 of the nurses whose cases he had been involved in. The bar's disciplinary process was even slower than the federal one. But it had been filed. It was in the record. It would move. Claire stopped tracking all of it at a certain point, not because it stopped mattering, but because tracking it had become a way of deferring the question Jonas had asked her from an ICU bed. What do you want? She was in the ER on a Tuesday morning in November, 4 months after the helicopter, when Finch's assistant called again. The meeting this time was not in the office. It was in the conference room, and it was not alone. Reese was there by video from Lewis McCord, a rectangle on a laptop screen at the end of the table. 2 members of the hospital board. Osei, Finch. Finch opened. We're here to discuss the position of Director of Emergency Services, she said. Claire looked at her. The position has been vacant since the prior director left in August, Finch continued. The board has reviewed internal and external candidates. We'd like to offer it to you. I'm a staff nurse, Claire said. You have the clinical qualifications, Finch said. The military equivalencies have been formally assessed. Reese's office provided documentation. Your emergency medicine experience, combined with your administrative capacity and your direct knowledge of the department's needs, makes you the strongest candidate we've considered. She paused. I want to be direct. We're not offering this because of what happened. We're offering it because you're the best person for the position. What happened made it visible to us that the position existed and that you should be in it. From the laptop screen, Reese said, For what it's worth, Ms. Voss, this is not a compensatory gesture from our side either. The endorsement letter I sent to the board was based on your record. Claire sat with it for a moment. Director of Emergency Services. Not a symbolic title, a functional one. Staffing decisions, protocol development, training oversight, the structural work of building a department that treated its people the way it was supposed to treat its patients, with the assumption that they were worth something, that their knowledge and their limits and their breaking points all mattered. She thought about what she'd told Osei. Working depends on whether the people at the top of the institution actually want it to work. She could be one of the people at the top of the institution. That was a different kind of staying than the staying she'd done for 14 months. That was not keeping her head down and filing things away. That was choosing the room and choosing to be in it with the intention of making it different. I have conditions, she said. Finch nodded once. Tell me. The independent reporting framework Osei proposed goes into implementation immediately. Not pending, not in pilot, full implementation. Agreed, Finch said. The nursing staff in the ER have a formal peer review structure with protected reporting, not HR routed, independent. We'll have to build that, Finch said. But yes. I want Pam Nguyen as charge nurse with a formal department head designation. She's been doing the job without the title and without the pay for 6 years. Finch looked at the board members. One of them nodded. Agreed. Claire looked at the laptop screen. At Reese. And if a patient comes through this ER with military classification codes, she said, I want a direct liaison protocol with your office. Not through administration. Direct. Reese looked at her. Something in his expression that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent. That was already in my letter to the board, he said. She looked at Finch. Then yes. The paperwork took 2 weeks because paperwork always took 2 weeks. The announcement went to staff on a Thursday, which was not a day Claire would have chosen, but was when HR was ready, and she found out about it the way everyone else found out. A facility-wide email from Finch's office at 9:15 a.m. She was at the nursing station when Dara read it on her phone, looked up, and said, Are you serious? Apparently. Dara stared at her. Director? Yes. Of the whole department. That's what it says. Dara put her phone down on the desk. She looked at it. She looked at Claire. She looked at the ER around them. The noise of it. The organized motion of it. The particular beautiful chaos of a place where people came when something had gone wrong and needed someone who knew what they were doing. Okay, Dara said. Her voice had something in it that wasn't quite professional. Okay? Good. Pam found out in a separate conversation that Claire had 20 minutes later in the break room, where the good coffee was still occasionally available and the machine still occasionally required argument. She told Pam about the designation, the title, the pay. Pam looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked at Claire. You didn't have to do that, she said. You've been doing the job without the recognition for 6 years, Claire said. I needed someone I trusted. There are more senior nurses. There are nurses with more tenure, Claire said. You're the person I trust. That's the criteria. Pam pressed her lips together, nodded once. Did not cry this time, which Claire suspected was because she had no tears left on the subject and had moved past it into the territory of practical action. I have a list, Pam said. Of course you do. Of things that need to change in the department, structural things. I've had it for... Bring it next week, Claire said. We'll go through it. She walked out of the break room and stood in the ER corridor for a moment. Not performing anything, just standing in it, the way you stood in a place you were choosing rather than accommodating. The news of the indictment had settled into the public record the way things settled when they moved from breaking to established. Still present, still significant, no longer a surprise. Thorne's name appeared in search results now in ways that would not change regardless of how the trial ended, because the record of an indictment was not dependent on a verdict. The billing irregularities, the altered surgical report, the conduct pattern across 11 years, it was in the federal record, in the medical board record, in Patricia Graves's piece, in the bar complaint documentation. It was not erased. None of it was erased. That was how it was supposed to work. She thought about him sometimes, not with anger, which she'd expected to feel more of, and not with satisfaction, which felt too clean, with something more complicated, the recognition that he had been shaped by a system that had rewarded a certain kind of person for a long time and had never once asked him to examine what that reward was doing to the people around him. That didn't excuse anything. It didn't diminish anything. But it was the true thing, and she had found, over the years, that the true thing was more useful than the simple thing, even when the simple thing felt better. She had kept his letter. It was in a drawer at home, in the same file folder where she kept her military papers and her nursing licenses, and the 2 incident reports she had filed and the notes from the alderman meeting. The documentation of a life that had required at every stage keeping a record of things that mattered. In January, 4 months after taking the director position, she was asked to present at a regional nursing leadership conference on the subject of institutional reporting structures and staff advocacy. She said yes. She spent 2 weeks preparing the presentation and deliberately did not make it about herself, making it instead about the data, the closure rates, the systemic patterns, the practical mechanisms that allowed harm to persist inside institutions that were nominally committed to care. At the end of the presentation, during the Q&A, a nurse from a hospital in another state raised her hand. She was younger than Claire, mid-20s, the look of someone in her first or second year in a large facility. What do? She said, when you file a report and it gets closed. When the system tells you that what you saw didn't matter? The room was quiet. About 90 people in it. Claire looked at her for a moment. You keep the copy, she said. You document every interaction. You write down dates and times and exact words, and you store it somewhere outside the system you're reporting to. Not because it will immediately fix anything, because it often won't. She paused. But because the record is the thing that survives. Systems can close reports. They can't close what you know happened. And the record you keep is the thing that becomes available later, when the circumstances change, when someone else comes forward, or when an investigation reaches far enough back, or when an institution finally has to answer for the pattern instead of the individual incident. She paused. You also find the people around you who see what you see. You're not the only one. You're almost never the only one. And when the moment arrives, and sometimes it takes a long time, and sometimes it doesn't arrive the way you expected, you need to be the person who says something first, because the person who goes second almost always has an easier path than the person who went first, and someone has to go first. The room was still. The young nurse nodded. She wrote something down. In April, Jonas came back. Not as a patient, he drove himself in a truck with military plates and parked in the visitor lot and came through the main entrance and asked the security desk, Kevin, who had been on day shift for long enough that he recognized almost everyone, where to find Director Voss. Kevin called her on the internal line. There's a guy here. He says he's a friend. Army. She went down. Jonas looked better than he'd looked the last time she'd seen him, at the curb in October, with a cane and the careful walk of someone managing new limits. The cane was gone. His gait was not perfectly even. There was a slight compensation in the right hip, the kind of adjustment that settled into a person's movement after a significant vascular repair and sometimes resolved fully and sometimes became permanent. But he was moving without assistance and moving well. He looked at her for a moment. "The leg," she said. 75%, they tell me. Maybe more by summer. "Physical therapy?" "I did what they asked." He paused. Mostly. Within a reasonable margin, he said, which meant not entirely, which was entirely Jonas. They walked through the hospital to the courtyard on the east side, which had been renovated over the winter. New benches, a few trees that had been transplanted rather than grown there, a small water feature that was more calming in concept than in execution, but was genuinely trying. They sat on a bench in the April light, and it was warm enough that the sitting was comfortable. "The trial's been pushed," he said, "spring to fall." "I heard." "How are you doing with all of it?" She thought about the question the way she'd been trying to think about questions lately. Not as performance, not as management, but as a genuine inquiry requiring a genuine answer. "Some days it feels very far away," she said, "and some days it doesn't." She looked at the trees, the transplanted ones still young, their roots still adjusting to a new location. "I don't think about him the way I thought I would. I thought there'd be more of something, anger or satisfaction or—" She paused. "Mostly, I just think about the department. That's healthy. Or it's avoidance." "Could be both," he said. They sat for a while without talking. The water feature did its thing. The April light moved through the transplanted trees in a way that was, despite everything, pleasant. "Sutherland applied to a fellowship program," she said. "Trauma surgery, strong program. Reese's office wrote him a letter." "Good." "Vivienne got promoted. She's training new nurses now." She looked at the courtyard. "Elliot's applying for attending positions. He's going to be excellent." "Because of you?" "Because of himself," she said. "I didn't make any of them who they are. I just made it slightly more possible to be that person in this building." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's not nothing." "No," she said. "It isn't." She thought about the young nurse at the conference with her hand up and her notebook open. She thought about Pam's 3 pages, about Aaron Sutherland going to Pharaoh's office with a phone full of time-stamped notes, about the text that had arrived at her kitchen table. Knowing someone else had said something first made it easier. She thought about the coffee cup hitting the bottom of a trash bin, and 30 people deciding not to see it, and the particular corrosive weight of a room full of people learning to look away. She thought about 4 minutes in a trauma bay outside of normal time, and a soldier breathing, and the one thing she had said when she walked out of it, "The patient is stable. That's what matters." It had been the true thing then. It was still the true thing. The work was the work, and the work was what she had come for, and the work was what she stayed for. Not for recognition, not for the record to be corrected, not even for the accounting, though the accounting had been necessary, and she would not pretend otherwise. She stayed because there was a next person coming through those doors who was afraid and alone and needed someone who knew what they were doing and would say, without performance, without caveat, "You're going to be okay." And that sentence required a person who had earned it, not through hierarchy, not through the right badge or the right title or the right degree on the right wall, but through the accumulated weight of having done the thing, in the moments that required the thing, without waiting to be asked. That was the work. It had always been the work. "You're not coming back to the service," Jonas said. Not a question. "No." "Okay." He said it without pushing further. He had always known when to stop. They sat in the April courtyard for another 20 minutes, talking about his unit, about physical therapy benchmarks, about a hiking trail near Lewis McCord that he was planning to attempt by summer, about the coffee at the deli 2 blocks from the hospital that she had been going to most mornings, and that what she had told him, the primary quality of life improvement of the past 6 months. When he left, he stood up from the bench and tested the right leg once before committing his weight to it, a small, private check that she noticed and did not comment on. And then he walked back through the hospital the way he'd come, through the lobby, past Kevin, out the main doors. She watched him go. Then she went upstairs to her department, where Pam was at the nursing station with her list of structural things, and Dara was triaging a walk-in, and someone down the hall was asking for the person in charge, and she walked past all of it toward the sound of the asking, because someone needed the person in charge, and the person in charge was her, and she had been ready for that longer than anyone here had known. There was a sign above the ER entrance that she'd had installed in her second month as director. Not inspirational, not decorative, functional, the way she liked things. Black text on a white background, same font as the department signage. Nothing that asked to be noticed. It said, "Every person who walks through this door is someone's most important person. Act accordingly." She had not put her name on it. That had been deliberate. The point was not who had said it. The point was whether the people who read it every day believed it. Most of them, she thought, were starting to.